Random House Audiobooks presents Beast by Peter Benchley. Read for you by David Rasche.
Beast. It hovered in the ink-dark water, waiting. It was not a fish. It was not a mammal. Its 8 sinuous arms floated on the current. Its 2 long tentacles were coiled tightly against its body. When it was threatened, or in the frenzy of a kill, the tentacles would spring forward tooth-studded whips. Had it been observable to the human eye, the animal would have been seen as purplish maroon, but that was now at rest. When aroused, it would change color again and again. The only element of the sea that the animal's sensory system monitored constantly was temperature. It was most comfortable in a range between 40 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit, and as it drifted with the currents, it moved up or down. Unlike many fish, it did not need community. It roamed the sea alone, and so it was unaware that many more of its kind existed than had ever existed before. The balance of nature had been disrupted. It existed to survive and to kill. For peculiarly, if not uniquely, in the world of living things, it often killed without need, as if nature, in a fit of perverse malevolence, had programmed it to that end. Elizabeth Griffin was sleepy. The boat's motion was the worst kind of soporific. Perhaps she should wake her husband, Howard. She looked at her watch. No, he'd only been asleep for an hour and a half. Let him have another half hour. She slapped herself in the face and shook her head. A wave lapped over the stern of the boat and soaked her. There's no problem. The water wasn't cold. It would... A wave? Now, how does a wave come over the stern of a boat when you're heading into the sea? She turned and looked. The stern was 4 inches from being awash. Adrenaline shot up her back and down her arms. She reached forward of the wheel, lifting a plastic cover, and flicked the switch that turned on the bilge pump. She heard the electric motor start, but something was wrong with the sound. It was distant, faint, and laboring. "Howard!" she shouted. No answer. "Howard!" Nothing. "Howard!" She looked into the after cabin. 6 inches of water covered the carpet. Howard Griffin was in a dark, foreboding dream. He willed himself awake, sensing that something was wrong. "I don't know, what is it?" he said. "We're sinking!" Griffin heard sloshing in the after cabin, saw the water, and knew what had happened. When the engine was not running, when the boat was sailing or tied to a dock, salt residue and molecules of corrosive chemicals had lain in the exhaust pipe and begun gradually to eat away at the steel. The minuscule hole in the exhaust pipe would have been there for weeks. They had had fair winds all the way up from the Bahamas and had used the engine only to power in and out of St. George's Harbor. But now, with the engine running steadily and the heat exchanger pump working full time, the hole was growing. Water that had dripped into the bilges now flowed. "Shut down the engine," he said. "What? Now!" Elizabeth found the lever and choked off the engine. Then she heard Griffin's voice below. "Bermuda Harbor Radio, this is the yacht Severance. Mayday, 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 we are sinking. Our position is, fuck." The boat yawed. Water rushed over the stern. A hand grabbed Elizabeth and pulled her back, and Griffin's voice said, "We've sunk." "No." "Hey," he said, and he gathered her to him and held her head against his chest and stroked her hair. "She's gone. What we've got to do is get the hell off before she slips away, okay? She looked up at him and nodded. Good. He kissed her head. Get the EPIRB. Griffin went forward and uncovered the raft lashed to the cabin roof. He checked the rubberized box screwed to the deck plates to reassure himself that the flares, the fishing lines, and the emergency rations were aboard. As he undid the last of the raft's lashings, Griffin felt a weird satisfaction. He wasn't panicking. Elizabeth came forward. She carried the plastic bag containing the boat's papers, their passports, and cash, and in her other hand the EPIRB, the emergency beacon, a red box covered with yellow styrofoam with a retractable antenna on one end. The deck was awash now, and it was easy for them to heave the raft over the low railing into the sea. Griffin took Elizabeth's hand, and they watched in silence. The sailboat was a black silhouette against the stars. The stern sank lower and then slowly disappeared. And then, suddenly, the bow rose up like a rearing horse and slipped backward down into the abyss. Enormous bubbles rushed to the surface and burst with muffled booms. Its sensory receptors were processing signals of increasing danger. Something large was approaching from above. It prepared to defend itself. Chemical triggers fired throughout the great body. Chromatophores ignited within the flesh, and its color changed from maroon to a lighter, brighter red. It cocked its two longest whip-like arms and then turned and backed around to face the direction from which its enemy was coming. Whatever was coming moved erratically at first and then angled downward without a pause. Whatever it was passed and continued to the deep, trailing strange noises, creaks and pops, dead sounds. The creature's color changed again, and its arms uncocked and unfurled with the sea. Random drift had brought the creature to within 100 feet of the surface, and its eyes gathered flickering shimmers of silver from the stars. Because light could signal prey, it allowed itself to rise toward the source. Hunger drove the creature now, hunger that had become more and more urgent as it searched in vain for prey in the deep. Once, hunger had been a simple cue, a signal to feed. But now, food was a quest, for prey had become scarce. Again, the animal was alert, not to defend itself, but to attack. They had not spoken. Griffin had fired a flare, and, holding hands, they had watched the yellow arc and the burst of orange brilliance against the black sky. The raft dipped off the top of a wave and slid into a trough. They were capsizing. Elizabeth knew it. They couldn't stop it. She screamed. Then the raft evened out and bobbed gently up the next wave. "Hey," said Griffin, and he edged over to her and put his arms around her shoulders. "It's okay. We're fine." "No," she said into his chest. "We're not fine." "Okay. Okay. What are you scared of?" "What am I scared of?" she snapped at him. "We're in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of the night, in a raft the size of a bottle cap, and you ask me what I'm scared of? How about dying?" Dying from what?" She took a deep breath. "Sharks. Call me a wimp, but I'm terrified of sharks." "Sharks. Good. Okay. We can forget about sharks." "You can, maybe." "No. Listen. The water's cold. The Japanese and the Koreans have fished most of them out anyway, and if some big shark does come around, as long as we stay in the raft, we don't look, smell, or feel like anything he's used to eating. Now what else? Well, suppose a storm. Okay, weather. Not a problem. The forecast is good. We're not in hurricane season. We float around until we starve to death. Not going to happen. 1, the wind is pushing us back toward Bermuda. 2, there are ships in and out of here every day. 3, worst case, by Monday afternoon the kids will report us missing, and Bermuda Harbor Radio knows all about us. But it won't get to that. This baby is beating its heart out for us." He patted the EPIRB. First plane that goes over will call out the cavalry. Probably already has. Elizabeth was silent for a minute. You're not scared? He hugged her and said, Sure I am. Good. She put her head down into his chest and breathed through her nose. She smelled salt and sweat. Comfort. She smelled 20 years of her life. So, she said, want to fool around? Right, he laughed. Capsize in a fit of passion? Elizabeth suddenly started. She sat up and turned toward the bow. What was that? What was what? That scraping noise. I didn't hear anything. Like fingernails. Where? She crawled forward and touched the rubber on the foremost cell of the raft. Right here, like fingernails scraping on the rubber. Something from the boat, maybe. Forget it. What's that smell? What smell? Griffin took a deep breath, and now he did smell it. Ammonia? Well, that's what I thought. Something from the boat. Such as? Oh, how do I know? Unless something spilled in here. He turned and faced the stern of the raft and unzipped the lid of the rubberized box. It was too dark to see, so he bent over to smell the inside of the box. He heard a noise like a grunt, and the raft bounced and lurched to one side. Hey! He steadied himself with one hand on each side of the raft. Careful there! There was no alien odor in the box. He zipped it closed. Nothing. But the smell of ammonia was stronger now. He turned back to face the bow. Elizabeth was gone. He called out, Elizabeth! The word was swallowed by the breeze. He called again. He sat back and took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He felt dizzy and nauseous, and his pulse thundered in his ears. After a moment, he opened his eyes again, expecting to see her sitting in the bow and eyeing him quizzically, as if wondering if he'd had a fit. He was still alone. He screamed her name again and again. He heard a scraping noise, felt something touch the rubber beneath his buttocks. In the yellow-gray light from the sliver of the moon, he saw something move on the front of the rubber raft. It seemed to be clawing its way up the rubber, scrambling to come aboard. A hand. It had to be a hand. He flung himself forward and reached out, and when his fingers were an inch or two away from it, he realized that it wasn't human. It was slimy and undulant, an alien thing that moved toward him, reaching for him. Griffin recoiled and scrambled toward the stern of the raft. He skidded, fell. But then he watched, horrified, as it reappeared and inched upward until finally it was entirely atop the rubber cell. It straightened up, fanned out, looking now, he thought, like a giant cobra. Its surface was crowded with circles, each quivering with a life of its own and dripping water like ghastly spittle. Griffin screamed! But the thing kept moving forward, compressing itself into a conical mass and slithering toward him, walking, it seemed, on its writhing circles. Griffin's eyes fell on the oar in the raft. He grabbed it and held it like a baseball bat. He braced himself on his knees, and when he judged that the moment had come, he shouted, "Son of a bitch!" and slammed the oar down upon the advancing thing. He was never to know whether the oar struck the thing or whether somehow the thing had anticipated it. All he would know was that the oar was torn from his hands and held aloft and crushed and rejected, cast away into the sea. The thing hovered over him, twitching and spraying him with drops of water. Each of its circles twisted and contorted itself as if in hungry competition with its neighbors, and in the center of each was a curved hook, which, as it reflected rays of moonlight, resembled a golden scimitar. That was the last Griffin knew, save for pain. Whip Darling took his cup of coffee out on the veranda to have a look at the day. He saw a splash in the bay, then another, and heard a fluttering sound. Baitfish, a school of fry running for their lives and skittering over the glassy surface. The screen door swung open behind him, and his wife Charlotte, barefoot and wearing the summer cotton nightgown that showed the shadow of her body, came out with her cup of tea and, as she did every morning, stood beside him. He put an arm around her shoulder. "Mackerel in the bay," he said. "Good. First time in what?" 6 weeks or more." "You going out?" "I expect so. I want to retrieve the aquarium's lines." He finished his coffee, poured the dregs onto the grass, and as he turned to go inside, looked at the dark blue shutters, paint flaking, slats cracked and sagging. "Lord, this house is a mess." "Oh, they want $200 apiece to do the shutters," said Charlotte. $3,000 for the whole lot." "Thieves," he said, and he held the door for her. "I suppose we could ask Dana." She paused. "Not a chance," he said. "Things aren't that bad." "Well, maybe not yet, William." She went into the house, "but almost." "William now, is it?" he said. "It's pretty early in the morning for your heavy artillery." William Somers Darling was named after the Somers who settled Bermuda by shipwreck in 1609. Most Bermudians were named after one or another of the early settlers, and yet, as if in rebellion against mother country pretension, most Bermudians soon assumed a nickname. Darling's nickname was Buggy Whip, in commemoration of the weapon with which his father had regularly thrashed him. His friends called him Whip, and so did Charlotte, except when they argued or discussed something she considered too serious for levity. Then she called him William. He was a fisherman, or rather he had been. Now he was an ex-fisherman, for being a fisherman in Bermuda had become about as practical a profession as trying to be a ski instructor in the Congo. It was hard to make a living catching something that wasn't there. They could live comfortably, if not lavishly, on $20,000 or $25,000 a year. They owned the house. It had been in his family since before the American Revolution. But $20,000 might as well have been $1 million, because he wasn't making it. This year was half gone, and so far he had made less than $7,000. His daughter, Dana, was working downtown in an accounting firm, making good money instead of going to college. For a while she had succeeded in stealing some of their bills from their mailbox and paying them herself. When, inevitably, she'd been discovered, she'd advanced the defense that since the house was going to be hers one day, she saw no reason why she shouldn't contribute to its maintenance. The argument had slipped away from reason into dark regions of trust and mistrust, and had ended in hurt and anger. Maybe Charlotte was right. Maybe things were that bad. Darling had seen a folder from the bank in a pile of mail, but before he could ask about it, it had vanished. Now he forced himself to wonder, was she already talking about mortgages or loans? Would they have to let the bank get its hooks into them? No, he wouldn't let it happen. The Newport Bermuda race was coming up in 10 days, and a friend in the dive business was overbooked for charters during the layover and had asked Darling to pick up a few for him. Well, they'd be good for $1,000, maybe $5,000 in all. Then there was the aquarium retainer, which paid his fuel costs, in exchange for his bringing them exotic animals he fished up from the deep. The aquarium also paid a bonus if he caught something spectacular. Finally, there was always the chance, about as long as winning the Irish sweepstakes, but never mind, a chance, that he'd find a shipwreck with some goodies on it. Darling's mate, Mike Newstead, showed up a little after 7. Darling liked to joke that a geneticist would have prized Mike as the ultimate Bermudian, for he contained every ethnic strain ever represented in the colony. He was 36, 5 years younger than Darling, but he looked ageless. Mike stood 6'4" and weighed well over 220 pounds, not a gram of which was fat. Though Mike was slow to anger, he was said to possess an explosive temper that was kept in check by his diminutive Portuguese wife and by Darling, whom he loved. Darling considered him the perfect mate. Mike didn't like to make decisions, but rather preferred to be told what to do. If he had any opinions, he kept them to himself. He communicated most intimately and joyfully with Darling's most hated enemies, machines. Darling poured Mike some coffee, and they went outside and stood on the dock and watched a cormorant wheeling over the bay in search of food. "I guess we'll go pull the aquarium's traps," Darling said. "We leave 'em down there too long, critters might die or get eaten. Traps could break away." "Aye." "Might take along some bait, just in case." Mike nodded, finished his coffee, and went to the freezer in the tool shed to fetch some mackerel for bait. Darling boarded the boat and started the big Cummings diesel and let it warm up. The privateer was a shrimp dragger that Darling had bought at a yard in Houma, Louisiana, and converted to an all-purpose Bermuda workboat. She had a dry and roomy house, 2 compressors, 2 generators, and racks for 20 scuba tanks. Mike hopped aboard and cast off fore and aft. Darling put the boat in gear and eased out of Mangrove Bay and around the point to Blue Cut. Darling had set the aquarium's line to the northwest, about 6 miles offshore. For some reason, the creatures that interested the aquarium seemed to live only off the northwest edge. Now, as they cruised among the reefs, the water was calm, but with enough of a ripple to cut the glare and give definition to the different colors of corals. His gaze drifted from the white sand holes to the crevices and patches of reef, and always his eyes searched for the telltale signs of a shipwreck that could be as old as the time of the first King James. Bermuda had always been a ship trap, and it still was, even with all the modern navigational aids like RDF, LORAN, and satellite navigation, because the volcano, albeit extinct, protruded from the bottom of the sea like a wand full of electromagnetic anomalies. Machines, electronic or magnetic, seized up and went berserk around Bermuda. Nothing worked, not reliably. The whims of the Bermuda volcano helped spawn the legends of the Bermuda Triangle. And back in the old days, the reefs were capturing so many ships that an industry arose of people who made their living rowing out and salvaging stricken ships. Some weren't content to wait. They wanted to make their luck, and they'd wave phony lights to lure ships onto the reefs. Today, Darling saw no signs of shipwreck in the shallow water, but what he did see, for it was all he saw, drew the happiness out of him like a syringe pulling blood. 1 parrotfish, a needle-like garfish tail walking across the surface, 6 flying fish that spooked away from the boat's bow, and a few meandering breams. Reefs that had once teemed with life were as empty as a train station after a bomb scare. He felt as if he were witnessing a funeral for a way of life, his way of life. Soon, the shallows sloped away to 40 feet, 60 feet, 100 feet, and he stopped looking at the bottom and began to search for his buoy. "Coming up on it," Darling called down to Mike, who put the pump motor he was fixing aside and reached for the boat hook. The orange and white buoy slid down the side of the boat, and when it reached the stern, Mike snagged it and pulled it aboard, and walked it forward and wrapped the rope around the winch. Darling put the boat in neutral and came down from the flying bridge. "Go you," Mike said, and Darling pushed the lever and turned on the winch, and as the rope began to come up, Mike fed it into a 55-gallon plastic drum. They'd put down 3,000 feet of polyethylene rope with a buoy on top and 25 pounds of sash weights to keep it at the bottom. Starting at 2,000 feet, they had attached, at every 100-foot interval, a 20-foot length of 48-strand stainless steel airplane cable, and at the end of each cable was one of the aquarium's gimmicks. Some were small wire boxes, some were contraptions of fine mesh net. Most had bits of guri inside to attract whatever creatures lived down in the dark. Darling indulged his theory about ocean scavengers. Whatever stinks most works best, and he had baited the traps with the rankest, rottenest flesh he could find. Into a few of the traps he had put no bait at all, just Sialume chemical lights, following another of his theories, that light was such a novelty in a world of perpetual night that some animals might be drawn to it out of curiosity. "Something's not right," Mike said. He had a hand on the rope, feeling the tension with his fingertips. "She's stuttery. Feel it." Darling felt the rope. It was trembling erratically. Darling held up a hand, telling Mike to slow the winch, and bent over the side to see the first trap come into view. He saw the glint of the first stainless swivel holding the length of cable, saw the cable, and then nothing. The trap was gone. Impossible. The only animal large enough to take it was a shark, and there was nothing in the trap to interest a shark. And if one of them had taken a run at it, he would have taken the whole rig with him, rope and all. There was no way a shark could have broken the cable. Darling held the end of the cable close to his eyes. It had been sheared off, cut as clean as if by a scalpel. There were no gnaw marks, no worry marks. "Bit," he said. "Bit clean through." "Bit?" Darling looked out over the water. What in the name of Christ has a mouth that can bite through 48 strands of stainless steel? Mike said nothing. Darling gestured for him to start the winch again, and in a moment the second cable came up. "Gone," he said, for that trap had vanished too, that cable bitten through. "Gone," he said again as the next cable appeared, and the next, and the next. They were all gone. Now he saw the sash weights coming, and there was something strange about them, so he told Mike to stop the winch, and he pulled the last of the rope by hand. "Sweet Jesus," he said, "look here." One of the traps had been wrapped around the weights, embedded into them so hard it was as if everything had been melted together in a furnace. Mike stared at it. "Jesus, Whip, what kind of sumbitch do that?" "No man for sure," said Darling. "No animal neither. At least, no animal I've ever seen." They didn't speak as they disassembled the rig. Darling was running through the catalog of creatures in his head, trying to think of what might have the power and the inclination to destroy that rig. Part of him hoped they'd never know. He wasn't a stranger to the fact that nature had a dark side. Once, more than 2 decades ago, he'd been crew on a tanker off South Africa when, out of nowhere, had come a rogue wave that had put 100 foot of water in front of the ship. If Darling hadn't been sent up to the crow's nest 3 minutes earlier to fetch something, he would have gone down with the ship. Instead, he'd washed overboard and drifted on a hatch cover for 2 days until a coastal freighter picked him up. Another time, in Australia, he and some mates had jumped ship after discovering the captain was addicted to ouzo and boys, and they'd embarked on a reckless treasure hunt in the outback. They'd met up with a family on holiday in a little caravan, and one afternoon they came back to find the whole family dead, killed by a taipan, a snake that attacks for the sake of attacking, that kills for the sake of the kill. Darling had gradually concluded that nature wasn't to be trusted. Often enough she revealed a sinister side. Mike had had no such experiences, and he was not happy with the unknown. He didn't mind so much not having answers himself, but he didn't like it when Whip didn't have them. Darling saw his signs of anxiety. He knew he'd have to ease the man's misery. "I take it back," Darling said. "I think it was a shark." "What makes you think so?" Mike asked, wanting to believe, but needing some convincing. "Had to be. I just remembered National Geographic. Some sharks can put out 20 tons per square inch when they bite. That'd be more than enough to cut those cables." Mike thought for a moment and then said, "Oh." Darling looked up at the sky. He felt an odd desire to quit and go home, but the sun was still climbing. It wasn't yet noon, and he'd already burned up $25 or $30 worth of fuel. If they went home now, he'd be out of pocket $50 with nothing to show for it but an awkward explanation to the aquarium. And so he forced himself to say, "What say we try for a day's pay?" Mike said, "Good enough." And together they began to rig a deep line with some baited hooks. Maybe they'd catch something worth selling, maybe just something worth eating. Even if they just caught something, it would be better than heading back to the dock and acknowledging another day's defeat. The thought depressed. All fishing did nowadays was remind him of how good things used to be. In the late 60s and 70s, he could still go out on the reefs and catch his dinner. There were lobsters under every rock, schools of parrotfish, angelfish, triggerfish, surgeonfish, damselfish, hogfish, porgies, even occasional groupers. Just over the edge in deeper water were whole colonies of groupers, Nassau groupers, spotted groupers, black groupers, and now and then a 500 or 600 pound jewfish. There were moray eels and tiger sharks, bull sharks and hinds and snappers. Turtles poked their heads up like little children swimming on the surface. A good day of fishing was 1,000 pounds of rockfish and 1,000 more of tuna, and the hotels took pride in listing the prime special of the day as fresh Bermuda fish. No more. Some of the hotels still listed Bermuda fish, but not with pride. For what they served now, all that was left was trash. The fish that had survived because nothing wanted them. Bermuda's ocean was one step from being as lifeless as the western eddies of Long Island Sound. What had killed Bermuda's fishing industry, Darling knew, was fishermen, and the chief villain was a piece of equipment they'd invented, the fish trap. In times past, fishermen had fished with hand lines, and what limited their catch was their grit. They stopped when they fell down in a stupor, their hands swollen like a convention of sausages. And then someone thought of putting down wire cages with bait inside and buoys to the surface. The fish would swim in, and thanks to construction of the traps, not be able to find their way out again. Soon everybody was putting traps down, as many as they wanted. There was supposed to be a limit, but nobody paid any attention to it. The first problem with the traps was that they did their job too well. They caught everything, big, small, young, old, pregnant, whatever. A handline fisherman could pick and choose and put back fish that were too small or too loaded with roe. The second problem was lost traps. If the buoy broke away, or the rope chafed off, or a storm sea pushed the trap over the edge into the deep and it sank beyond reach, the trap would keep killing. The fish inside would die and become bait for more fish, which would come in and be trapped and die and become bait for more fish, forever and ever, amen. Darling had found lost traps in the bottom that looked like a Tokyo subway car at rush hour, jam-packed with everything from eels to parrotfish to octopus to crabs. Finally, in 1990, about 10 years too late, the Bermuda government had outlawed trap fishing and paid off the island's 78 commercial fishermen. Now that the traps were outlawed, the hope was that the fish would come back, but Darling had his doubts. And as if man wasn't working fast enough to turn Bermuda into a wasteland, nature was throwing her wrecking ball at the island. Darling had a friend, Marcus Sharp, stationed at the U.S. Navy base, who showed him some figures concluding that the water temperature around Bermuda had risen by 2 degrees in the last 20 years. To a man in the city, 2 degrees might be nothing. To corals in the sea, 2 degrees spelled the difference between life and death. 10% of Bermuda's corals were already dead. If 10% became 20%, if then all the coral disappeared, gradually Bermuda would erode away, for corals were the island's shield against the open ocean. The last horse in the troika of destruction was the foreigners. The Japanese and the Koreans were massacring the deep-water species. They were out there every day, setting 30-mile-long nets, and they were getting everything. Those fishermen who didn't use nets used long lines, miles and miles of line, with baited hooks every few feet. They killed everything, without selection or discrimination. The sun had just begun to slide westward off its peak when they pulled in the line. The 8 hooks had caught 2 small red snappers, their eyes popped and their bladders squeezed out through their mouths by the sudden loss of pressure. Darling tossed them into the bait box. "Well, then, to hell with it," he said, and he went forward to start the engine. He was about to step inside the cabin when he heard Mike say, "Well, look there." A Navy helicopter was heading their way from the south. "I wonder where he's going," Darling said. "Nowhere. They never do. Just logging time." "I don't know," Darling said. Unless he's late for supper up in Nova Scotia, I'd say he's on a mission with some clout to it. He turned into the wheelhouse and picked up the radio microphone. Huey 1, Huey 1, Huey 1, this is Privateer, come back. Lieutenant Marcus Sharp had been shooting baskets that Friday when the operations officer called him and said that a British Airway pilot on his way to Miami had picked up an emergency signal 20 miles north of Bermuda. Sharp had quickly showered and pulled on his flight suit, while the operations officer had rounded up a co-pilot and a rescue diver for him and made sure one of the helicopters was gassed up. As he lifted off from Kinley Field and banked around to the north, for the first time in weeks, Marcus Sharp felt alive. Something was happening. Not much, not exactly what he'd call action, but anything was better than the nothing that had become his routine. Sharp's problem wasn't only that he was bored. It was more complicated than that, worse than boredom. He had a weird, amorphous sense that he was dying. Not physically, but in other, less tangible ways. He'd always needed adventure, courted danger, thrived on change. The Navy recruiter at Michigan State had recognized the need in Sharp for action and had played to it. He persuaded Marcus that the Navy offered him a chance to spend his career doing what others could hope to do only on occasional vacations. He could pick his specialty, change it regularly, and in the process contribute to the nation's defense. Sharp signed up before graduation, and in June of 1983, he entered Officer Candidate School in Newport, Rhode Island. The first few years met all his expectations. He became expert in underwater demolition. He qualified as a helicopter pilot. He saw combat in Panama, spent a year studying meteorology and oceanography on an exchange tour in Halifax. But in the past year and a half, variety and fun had ceased to satisfy. At the core of his discontent lay the only thing close to tragedy that Marcus Sharp had ever known. He had fallen in love with a United Airlines flight attendant, a skier and scuba diver, and they'd been all over the world together. And then one September day in 1989, they were snorkeling off a beach in North Queensland. They'd seen a turtle swimming by, and they'd followed it. Karen had reached out to touch it, and as Sharp watched, she suddenly convulsed and arched her back and clawed at her breast. Sharp grabbed her, but by the time he got her to shore, she was dead. The turtle had been feeding on sea wasps, colonies of nematocysts so toxic that a brush with them could stop a human heart. When Karen had been buried, Sharp had become plagued by the emptiness of life, the lack of focus. The Navy had given him the best billet available, a 2-year tour in Bermuda. There he'd found nothing much to do except shuffle papers and occasionally fly around in a helicopter. Meanwhile, he volunteered for any task that would keep his mind off himself. He was heading northwest now. 6 miles off the island, where the reefs ended, he heard a beep. He looked at the co-pilot, tapped his earphones, and the co-pilot nodded and gave him a thumbs-up sign. Then a voice came over his marine radio. Huey 1, Huey 1, Huey 1, this is Privateer, come back. Privateer, Huey 1, Sharp smiled. Hey, Whip, where you at? Right underneath you, lad. Going for an outing? A BA pilot picked up an EPIRB signal a while ago. Maybe I'll chase your wake. Okay, do that, Whip. Who knows? Might use your help. Done and done, Marcus. Good, Sharp thought. If there was a boat sinking out there, Whip would arrive a lot faster than any vessel summoned from the base. Besides, maybe there'd be something worthwhile for Whip if nobody claimed it. A raft, a radio, a flare gun, something worth selling or using, something to get Whip money or to save him money, and Sharp knew Whip needed it. Besides, Sharp thought, I owe him one. 1? Hell, he owed Whip Darling about 100. Whip had saved Sharp's sanity. He'd met Whip at a base function. Sharp had listened fascinated to Whip's discourse on the techniques of discovering shipwrecks, and had asked enough intelligent questions to secure an invitation to come out on the boat some Sunday, which had quickly become every Sunday and most Saturdays. As he listened to Whip, he learned. For here was a man with 6 years' schooling who had taught himself to be not just a fisherman and a diver, but a historian and a biologist and a numismatist and, well, a walking encyclopedia of the sea. The beeping was loud and regular now, and Sharp could see something yellow sliding up and down the rolling seas. It was a raft, small and empty, and apparently undamaged. He circled it, careful to stay high enough so that the downdraft from his rotors didn't start it spinning or capsize it off the top of a wave. "Privateer, Huey 1? "Yeah, Marcus," came Whip's voice. It's a raft. Nobody aboard. Why don't you let me pick it up with my davit? I'll cruise around, see if there's any swimmers, and then bring it to shore. Nobody has to get wet." "You got it. Meanwhile, we'll set a search grid and swing back and forth till fuel sends us home." They raised the raft in less than an hour. Darling made a slow circle around it. "She's a Switlick," he said, pleased. "There's a couple thousand, maybe more." "Looks brand new off the shelf." "Well, that or they were rescued right quick." Darling saw none of the normal signs that people had spent time in the raft. No dirt, no scuff marks, no bits of clothing. "The sharks got 'em," Mike said. Darling shook his head. "Shark would have bit through the rubber, maybe burnt it with his skin. You'd see it." "Oh, what then?" "Whale, maybe?" Darling kept circling as he pondered that possibility. Humpback whales had killed people, but always by accident. They had come up to rafts out of curiosity to see what they were, and gotten underneath and given a flip with their tails, and people had been flung to death. "No," Darling said, "everything would be upside down and akimbo." Mike said, "Could be the raft just slipped off the deck and fell in the ocean." "Then what turned on the EPIRB?" Darling pointed to the styrofoam-cased beacon. "That's not automatic." "Gun to my head, I'd say their boat sank out from under 'em and they tossed the raft in the sea and jumped for it and missed and drowned themselves." Mike seemed to like that answer, so Darling didn't articulate the hazy idea he had of another option. But something was bothering him, and he continued to stare at the raft. The oar. That was it. There wasn't any. Every raft carried at least one oar. And then his eye was attracted to sunlight glinting off something on one of the rubber cells. There were scratch marks. Around each scratch mark, shining in the sun, was a patch of some kind of slime. He touched his fingers to the slime and raised them to his nose. "What?" Mike said. Darling hesitated and then decided to lie. It's sunburn oil. Poor buggers were worried about their tans." He had no idea what it was. It stank of ammonia. Darling called Sharp on the radio and told him that he had the raft and intended to keep searching. And so they drove north for an hour. They just turned eastward, away from the sun, when Mike called out, "There!" and pointed off to the port side. 20 or 30 yards away, something big and glistening was floating in a tangle of sargasso weed. It bobbed slowly and had a wet sheen and quivered like jello. "Well, what the hell is that?" said Mike. "That beats me. Spawn of some kind, I guess." By 6 o'clock they had left the deep behind. From the flying bridge they could see sand holes on the bottom and dark patches of grass and coral. By the time Darling rounded the point into Mangrove Bay, the blue of the sky was fast turning violet, and the departed sun had tinted the western clouds the color of salmon. A single light bulb burned on the dock, and beneath it, moored to a piling, was a white 25-foot outboard motorboat with the word "Police" stenciled on the side. 2 young policemen stood on the dock. Darling knew the policemen. These 2 he'd taken to sea with him on their days off and helped them learn to read the reefs, had shown them the shortcuts to the few deep-water channels in and out of Bermuda. He leaned on the railing and said, "Colin? Barnett? Well, what brings you fellas out of a night?" "Heard you found a raft," Barnett said. "Yep, true enough." Barnett stepped aboard and pointed to the raft. "That it? That's the one," Collins said hesitantly. "Whip, we gotta take it." Darling paused. "Well, why is that? Somebody claimed to have lost it?" "No, not exactly." "Well, then it's mine, isn't it? First law of salvage, finders keepers." Not this time," Collins said. "Dr. St. John wants it." "Dr. St. John?" Now Darling knew he was bound to lose and his temper was bound to win. Liam St. John was one of the few men in Bermuda who Darling took the trouble to loathe. A second-generation Irish immigrant, he had gone away to school in Montana and graduated from some diploma mill that awarded him a doctorate. Exactly what the doctorate was in, nobody knew, and he never said. He had left Bermuda pronouncing his name St. John, and had returned pronouncing it, and insisting everyone else do too, St. John. St. John had rallied a few powerful friends of his parents and besieged the government, arguing that maritime history and wildlife management were being grossly mishandled by amateurs and should be turned over to certified experts, which meant him. The politicians created the new position of Minister of Cultural Heritage. They didn't bother with a precise job description, which suited St. John just fine, for he defined and expanded the job as he went along, assuming more and more authority. Scientists who had once regarded Bermuda as a prime deep-water laboratory no longer bothered to come, because St. John insisted that all discoveries be turned over to and examined by his staff, who prepared papers, always pedestrian, usually erroneous, for him to deliver at academic conclaves. For almost a year, Darling and his diver friends had fantasized about ways to get rid of St. John. "This raft is mine, and you know it." Darling wanted to say more. Wanted to say that it wasn't a matter of the raft, wasn't even just a matter of principle. It was also a matter of the $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 that could make a difference, dollars he was not going to let Liam St. John steal from him. "Whip," Barnett sighed. "You know what we're going to have to do." "Yep. You go back and tell Dr. St. John to suck eggs." "No. We're going to go back and get a dozen more coppers and come back and take the raft." "Not without somebody getting bruised." "Well, that may be, Whip, but think about it. That happens, you're going to end up in jail, we're going to end up with a raft, and who's going to get the last laugh? Dr. St. fucking John." Darling wanted to fight, but he swallowed it, because he knew Barnett was right. "Barnett," he said at last, "you are the soul of wisdom. Dr. St. John wants my raft, well, Dr. St. John shall have my raft." He stepped over the raft and raised the gaff above his shoulders and slashed downward at the bow. The hook plunged through the rubber, and, with a pop and a hiss, the cell collapsed. "Whoops," Darling said. "Sorry." And he dragged the raft toward the bulwark. He slammed the hook into another cell, and it deflated, and he hauled the sagging rubber up onto the bulwark. Something small fell from the raft and hit the steel deck with a click and rattled away. He withdrew the hook and stepped back and drove it through the aftmost cell. "Whoops," he said again, and dropped the raft into the police boat. "There. Dr. St. John can have his bloody raft." The policemen looked at one another. "Okay," said Colin. "We'll tell Dr. St. John that's how you found it." "Right," said Barnett. "Looks to me like a shark got it." Darling watched as the policemen started their motor and backed away into the darkness. "There's always the dive chargers during the big race layover," Mike said. "They'll turn us a pretty dollar." "Sure," said Darling. "Sure." As they cleaned up the boat, Darling felt something small and sharp under his foot. He picked it up and looked at it, but the light was bad, so he dropped it into his pocket. Darling followed Mike up the path to the house, waited till Mike had started his motorbike and driven away, then shut off the outside lights and went inside. He poured himself a couple of fingers of dark rum and sat in the kitchen. Charlotte came in, smiled, and sat across the counter from him. "That was childish," she said, quietly. "Do you know how sick it makes me to feel so helpless? I had to do something." "Did it make you feel better?" "Sure." "Really?" "Sort of." He looked at her. She was smiling. "Okay, you're right. I'm an old fart with a baby's brain." As he rose up to kiss her, something stabbed him in the thigh, and he yipped. "What?" she said. I've been punctured." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the thing he'd stepped on. It was a crescent-shaped hook, not of steel, but of some hard, shiny, bony substance. "Looks like a claw," said Charlotte. "Tiger, maybe. Where did you find it?" "It fell out of that raft," he said. He hesitated as he recalled the marks he'd seen on the raft, like cuts in the rubber. "What the hell?" Lucas Coven was always doing this, getting himself in over his head. It was his mouth that betrayed him every time. He swore that if he made it through today without a calamity or a lawsuit, he'd never go into a bar again. He looked down from the flying bridge to make sure his two passengers hadn't fallen overboard or speared one another. They had said that they were expert divers, had insisted on showing their advanced open water cards. But in Lucas's mind, people who decked themselves out in all that machinery weren't divers, they were shoppers. Besides, that girl Susie looked like she didn't need gear. She had a set of lungs on her that should take her to 1,000 feet on a single breath. Golden brown skin, the mane of yellow hair that when he first saw it had made him catch his breath. She was a prime candidate for that Sports Illustrated special issue. He had been dazzled by the girl from the moment he saw her in the bar. But he had no ambitions about her because the boy she was with was just as good-looking as she was. Lucas imagined them to be a matched pair from some scientific stud farm. They looked so much alike they could have been brother and sister, which, he later learned, was exactly what they were, twins. Because the booze had Lucas well in tow by now, and was deluding him that he was as smooth as Tom Cruise, Lucas began to fancy that he might actually have a chance with this heart-stopper. Lucas didn't say a thing while the two discussed the depths of the various shipwrecks they'd been on. He had found his opening when the boy, Scott, said something like, "The boat guy said the deepest wreck around here is the Pellananion?" "The deepest shipwreck in Bermuda," Lucas said with a smile, so charming, pleased to find that his mouth was working even though his lips felt kind of numb, "is the Admiral Durham." "And you've seen it?" Scott said. "Once, years back. She's not so easy to find. She starts at 190 and then angles down the slope to about 300. Scott said, "Give me a break." Susie put a hand on Lucas's arm, actually touched him, and with a glance at her brother that told him to keep quiet, said, "Our treat," and gestured to the bartender to give them a couple of beers, and Lucas another vodka. When the drinks came, Susie said, "Excuse us a minute," and she took Scott's arm and led him off by some empty tables. When they came back, it was Scott who started the ball rolling. Did Lucas think he could find the Admiral Durham again? Probably, but he didn't know. He was pretty busy. They'd make it worth his while. In fact, if he could guarantee to put them on the shipwreck, they'd pay $2,000. But if he didn't find it, they'd ride for free. Well, fair enough. But Lucas had to ask, were they sure they were up to a 200-foot dive? Did they know about the bends, which could cripple or kill them? Oh, sure, they were super careful. And if they hadn't actually gone to 200 feet before, they'd both been down well over 100. Scott said, "So let's raise a glass to the dive of a lifetime." And they had done just that, several glasses in fact, until the time came when Lucas decided to make his move on Susie and suggested they slip away for a quiet dinner somewhere. She'd laughed at him, not a nasty laugh, but a kind of sweet, motherly laugh that he couldn't get mad at, and ruffled his hair and said, "See you tomorrow." Lucas gave Southwest Breaker a wide berth. He could tell, looking down at them, that they were nervous, which was healthy. They might eat up air so fast they'd never get near the bottom, but that wasn't his worry. The day was looking promising, after all. With luck, he could be back at the dock by lunchtime. If they were successful, if he gave them the dive of a lifetime, Susie might yet come around. Well, you never knew. Lucas jockeyed the boat, nudging forward a hair, enough to compensate for the current gripping the anchor and bowing the line, and pushed the button that released the anchor. The creature was in a state close to hibernation. Its arms and whips floated freely, like gigantic snakes. Suddenly the silence was broken by sound vibrations, which showered down upon it and were amplified by the salt water. To a human ear, the sound would have been thick, resonant, metallic, the sound of solid steel striking hollow steel with weight and velocity. The creature moved toward the unnatural thing, then hovered over it, searching for the source of the sound. Any sound, any change whatever in the normal rhythms of the sea could mean prey. And the need that was overwhelming it, now that it was moving and consuming energy, was hunger. When Lucas was satisfied with the anchor set, he cleated off the rope and went aft. "Dive, dive, dive," he said, grinning at Scott and Susie, who looked like heroes from one of those comic books. They were wearing matching wetsuits, blue with yellow chevrons. Lucas ushered them down into the swim step off the stern. He said, "Swim on the surface up to the anchor line, and get a grip on it, and check everything out, and wait till you're all calm and cool. And when you're ready, one of you go first, the other right behind, fire for the bottom, and don't dally. You got precious little time as it is. Any spare time you got, use it to come up nice and slow." As soon as they hit the water, they inflated their vests and lay on their backs and kicked against the tide toward the bow of the boat. Lucas looked at his watch. 10:52. By 11 o'clock, he'd be either $2,000 richer or in a mess he didn't want to think about. The creature's eyes registered faint light above. It sensed movement, something coming closer, and a sound that signaled a life form. It dropped back, its great body resting in shadows, waiting. Scott pulled himself down the anchor rope hand over hand. He paused to check his air gauge, 2,500 pounds, plenty, and his depth gauge, 120 feet. He saw no shipwreck below him, no bottom. The feeling was eerie, but not frightening. Where was Susie? And Scott turned and looked back up the anchor line. She was way above, afraid, maybe, or having trouble with her ears. She'd be okay. Coven could look after her. At 160 feet, he saw it. A ghost ship seeming to sail right up to him, enormous beyond imagining. Fantastic. He unsnapped the video camera from his belt, switched on the light, and adjusted its settings. Then he aimed the camera at the bow of the ship and pressed the trigger and let himself drift gradually downward. It was alive, whatever this thing was, and it was coming. The creature cocked its whips and fluttered its tail fins and very slowly began to move out of the shadows toward the prey. Scott dropped down onto the bow of the ship. This was incredible, the size of it. His world became a tiny square with a green light in one corner and some numbers on the bottom. He felt a change in the rhythm of the water around him, but he didn't turn to look. It had to be a blip in the current, or perhaps Susie arriving nearby. Something touched him. He jerked. He turned, but all that he could see was a blur of purple, and then something had him around the chest and was squeezing. He twisted around, but the something kept squeezing. Now there were stabbing things in it like knives. He heard a crack in his ribs, breaking like sticks of kindling. The last thing he saw in his mask was a bubble of blood. Susie could see nothing above, nothing below. She was fighting to stay in control, not to panic. Why hadn't Scott waited for her? They were supposed to go down together. She clung to the anchor line and closed her eyes, willing herself to take slow, deep breaths. Her brain cleared. Panic subsided. She decided to drop down the line another 50 feet. Maybe she could at least see the shipwreck from there. Still clutching the rope, she let herself fall. Something was moving below. Something was coming up at her. It had to be Scott. He'd seen the wreck, and he'd taken his pictures, and he was already on the way back. She'd never get to see it. This moving thing, this purplish thing, it wasn't Scott rising at her. It was huge, so huge it couldn't possibly be alive. But what was it? What could it... Her last sensation was surprise. Lucas looked at his watch. 10:59. They better be on their way up in the next 60 seconds. If not, he'd have to get on the radio and find out where the nearest decompression chamber was. That is, unless they never got there at all, chickened out, maybe hung at 150 feet or so from where they could just see the shipwreck. Yeah, that was it. Had to be. They'd gotten halfway down and decided this was out of their league. They were 125, 150. They could stay for another 5 minutes. 11:02. He heard a noise down aft. Jesus! Stupid bastards had come up away from the anchor line, probably run out of air and shot for the surface. Be lucky if one of them didn't have an embolism. Now he smelled something. Ammonia. Ammonia here? As he edged to the side of the cabin, the boat suddenly heaved sharply to starboard. Christ, what was that? He heard wood crack and splinter. The boat was listing badly now. He had to struggle to keep his footing. He looked over the transom, and what he saw froze him. It was an eye. An eye as big as the moon, bigger even, in a field of quivering slime, the color of arterial blood. He shouted, not words, just noise, and snapped upright to flee the eye. He lurched to the right, took a step, but the boat heaved again and he was thrown backwards. His knees struck the transom, his arms flailed out, and he tumbled overboard. Marcus Sharp checked his fuel gauges and saw that in another 15 or 20 minutes he'd have to turn back to the base. He was about to turn to the northeast when his radio came alive. Huey 1, Kinley. Go ahead, Kinley. You feel like a little flake patrol, Lieutenant? Well, if it doesn't take more than 10 minutes, what's up? A woman called the cops, said she saw a boat go to pieces a mile south of Southwest Breaker. She was looking through her telescope for humpback whales, and she sees this fishing boat just go to pieces. No flame, no smoke, no nothing. Came apart. Sure, yeah, fat chance. Okay, I'll have a look, said Sharp. It's on the way home anyway. He flew south for 2 minutes and then turned southeast. Nothing. Nothing broke the endless roll of the blue swells. Kinley, Huey 1, Sharp said into his radio. I gotta break off. Nothing down there. Sharp turned east. Hey, his co-pilot said, and he tapped the plexiglass beside him and pointed downward. Sharp banked to the left and then looked. He saw 2 white rubber fenders, then some planks, then, half submerged, the entire roof of a boat's cabin. Can't stop now, Sharp said, or we'll be down there with it. He set his course at 040, straight for the base. He crossed the reef line and was just about to be over land when he looked to his right and saw the privateer chugging slowly westward along the shore. He pressed the talk button on his microphone and said, Privateer, this is Huey 1. Darling was in the wheelhouse, wondering how much he could get if he sold his Masonic bottle. It was a good bottle, rare, 170 years old, when the call came. He picked up the microphone off its hook. Privateer. Oh, more bullshit, Mike said. No, it wasn't his fault about the raft, said Darling. He tried to do us a good turn. Privateer Huey 1, said Sharp. Whip. There's a boat wrecked about 2 miles dead ahead of you. I haven't got fuel to look for survivors. Police boat's probably on the way, but you're closest. Well, roger that, Marcus. I'll go check it out. Hey, Marcus, probably going out this weekend if you're interested. There was a relief in Sharp's voice as he replied. I'll say. That is, if they don't have me swabbing latrines. Darling replaced the microphone on its hook. Why did the Navy get on Marcus's case? Asked Mike. Why do you think? 'Cause the Earl of fucking St. John got on theirs. Darling was finding himself so angry so often these days that he was beginning to wonder about himself. He and Mike had returned the damaged gear to the aquarium and had explained what little they knew about what had happened to it. The deputy director had said, "We'll be terminating our agreement with you." What? Why? Well, this was, He wouldn't look at Darling. Expensive equipment, after all. Sharks are big animals, after all. Jesus, Milton. If you want me to hang the gear at 10 feet, sure, nothing'll touch it. But if you want me to hang it down where the action is, there are risks. Yes, but I'm afraid that's that. Well, who's going to catch your critters for you? Well, that's yet to be decided. It's St. John, isn't it? Milton had looked away. I don't wildlife management. He's decided wildlife management takes in the aquarium too, right? You're jumping to... He's going to take my $800 a month and go out with a dip net and a case of Budweiser, and when he doesn't come back with shit, he can blame it on the oil spills off California. Darling was right, and he knew it. Darling was convinced that St. John saw him as a threat to his power. St. John was determined to bring Darling to heel, or to destroy him. And what rankled Darling was that St. John was succeeding. He had all the weapons. There, said Mike. Whip could see debris everywhere. Sling it all aboard, he called to Mike. For an hour he cruised among the debris as Mike grabbed piece after piece of flotsam and tossed it into the cockpit. You want that too? Mike said, pointing to a white wooden rectangle. No, that's the roof, Darling said. And then something came to him. He picked up a 4-pronged grapnel attached to 20 feet of rope and tossed it at the wood. He caught the far edge, dragging the corner of the roof out of the water. He had a glimpse of pea soup green on the underside. It's Lucas Coven's boat, he said. I saw him painting in the boat last spring. He was doing the whole inside of the house in baby shit green. Said he got the paint on sale. Oh, what the hell was he doing out here? Oh, you know Lucas, Darling said. Probably some half-assed scheme to make $2 in a hurry. How do you make $2 out here? There's nothing here. Nothing but the Durham. Nobody dives on the Durham. Nobody with sense. So, what blew him up? Darling said, nothing blew him up. No char, no smoke. He was busted up. Somehow. By what? Killer whales? Killer whales? In hailing distance of the beach? Well, you come up with something then. Darling felt anger welling up again. Hey, Whip, Mike said. Annoyed now with himself, Darling kicked a life jacket which rose off the deck and would have gone overboard if Mike hadn't caught it. What's this? Darling looked. The orange cloth had been shredded. There were 2 marks in it, circles about 6 inches in diameter. For God's sake, Darling says, looks like a scuttle. Sure, Mike thought Darling was joking. But what was it then? Darling tossed the life jacket onto the deck and kicked some pieces of wood aside to clear his way forward. One of the planks struck the steel bulwark, and as it fell backward, something dropped to the deck. It was a claw, like the other one, crescent-shaped, 2 inches long and sharp as a razor. As the boat settled again, something floated out from underneath it. Rubber. Blue, with a yellow chevron on either side. A wetsuit hood. Darling picked up the boat hook and dipped it overboard and scooped up the hood. It came up like a cup full of water, and in the water were 2 little black and yellow striped fish. Sergeant Majors. They were feeding on something. A smell rose from it, sharp and acrid, like ammonia. What the fish was feeding on looked like a big marble. Mike came up behind Darling and looked over his shoulder and gasped. "Is that human?" "It is," said Darling, and he stood aside to let Mike retch in the sea. Dr. Herbert Talley, one of the world's leading experts on cephalopods, crossed the quadrangle, stopped at Commons to pick up his mail, and climbed the stair to his tiny office. Talley hung his coat and raincoat on the back of the door, turned on the radio, and sat with his airmail copy of the Boston Globe. There was no news, really, at least nothing to excite an aging malacologist stuck in the wilds of Nova Scotia. Everything was more of the same. Suddenly his eyes snapped open. There it was, a tiny item on the bottom of the page. 3 die at sea, Bermuda, AP. 3 persons died yesterday when their boat sank from unknown causes. The victims included 2 children of media magnate Osborne Manning. There was no evidence of explosion or fire. Local residents, recalling the mysteries of the Bermuda Triangle, blamed the incident on a sea monster. The only clues noted by police were strange marks on wooden planks and an odor of ammonia in some of the debris. Ammonia. Ammonia was the key. Talley felt a thrill of discovery, as if he'd suddenly stumbled upon a new species. This species wasn't new, however. It was Talley's old nemesis, his quarry, a creature he'd spent a large part of his professional life seeking, a creature he'd written books about. But as quickly as he had become elated, he was overcome by gloom. He had to get to Bermuda, but how? He must mount a proper scientific search, but how would he pay for it? The university was funding nothing these days. Grant money had vanished. The solution was simple enough. Money. The world was full of money. How could he get some of it? From the radio came the strains of music he knew but couldn't name. The song ended, and then another song began, equally haunting, equally hopeful, and Talley knew what it was. Mahler's Kindertotenlieder, the song cycle about the death of children. A nice irony, Talley thought, that from the most ghastly of tragedies could come a wondrous masterpiece. It would take a spiritual giant to create beauty out of the death of children. Children. He stopped breathing. There it was, his answer. Manning, he read. Media magnate Osborne Manning. He picked up the telephone and asked the operator for directory assistance for New York City. Osborne Manning sat in his office and tried to focus on a report from one of his vice presidents. The news was good. So what? Would Cash bring back his kids? He hadn't known how much his family mattered to him until he lost it. Cash couldn't even buy him revenge, and revenge was the one thing he craved. But he didn't have the luxury of imagining revenge, for he had no idea what had killed his children. No one knew. The intercom buzzed on his desk. He spun around and punched a button and said, "Damn it, Helen, I told you, "Yes, sir," she said, "but there's this Canadian scientist on the phone." "Who?" "A man who says he knows what killed the children." Manning couldn't speak. He reached for the phone, and he saw that his hand was shaking. Mother and calf dove as one. Only a few months ago this would have been impossible. But now the calf was 2 years old, had grown to 25 feet long and more than 20 tons of weight. The sonar return was unmistakable. Prey. The mother thrust downward with her tail, accelerating, pulling away from her calf as she drove herself ever deeper. Though the prey was already located and had made no effort to escape, the mother's brain fired sonar missiles again and again, for it had determined that this was to be the calf's first mature kill. The prey was large, and must be stunned by sonar hammers before the calf could set upon it. She unleashed a final burst of sonar blows, and then swerved and began to circle the prey. The calf plunged downward, excited by the prospect of the kill, impelled by 1,000,000 years of imprinting. It opened its mouth. The creature felt the pressure wave. It lashed out with his whips. They flailed blindly and then found flesh, hard and slick. Automatically they surrounded it, and their circles fastened to it and their hooks dug in. The calf closed its mouth on nothing. Something was wrong. The mother circled, alarmed, sensing danger to her calf, but incapable of helping it. In the programming of her brain, there was no code for response to a threat to another, even to her own offspring. The creature held on, anchored to its enemy. The calf was drowning. Deprived of oxygen, the musculature in its tissue shut down bit by bit. An unknown agony coursed through its lungs. Its brain began to die. It stopped struggling. The whips tore away a chunk of blubber and fed it to the arms, which passed it back to the snapping, protuberant beak. The mother, circling, followed her calf with sonar pings. She sent clicks and whistles of distress, a bleat of helpless distress. At last her lungs too were exhausted, and with a final sonic burst, she thrust toward the life-giving air above. Marcus Sharp sat on the beach and wished he were somewhere else. He couldn't remember the last time he'd gone to a beach, probably not since the times with Karen. It was a Saturday, he was off duty, and he had hoped to go diving with Whip Darling. But when he'd called at 8 that morning, Darling had told him that he and Mike intended to chip paint all day. Sharp had offered to help, but Darling had said no. As he sat on the beach and watched children frolic, he'd seen 2 girls with potential, American tourists. They'd even stopped and spoken to him. He had wanted to talk to them, but he was out of practice in the dating game, and after he'd answered their questions about moderately priced restaurants, he'd let them get away. Within 5 minutes, of course, he had thought of several stratagems that might have intrigued them, and he cursed himself as a dim-witted fool. Sharp was hungry, and so he got to his feet and started toward the concession stand. He was about to turn into the trees when he saw the 2 American girls. They were tying their hair back with rubber bands. They saw him watching them, and they waved at him, ran into the water, and began to swim. When they were 30 or 40 yards offshore, the girl stopped and treaded water. Sharp walked down to the water's edge. He saw one of the girls wave, and he waved back. The girl waved again, with both hands, and then she disappeared underwater. Now the other one was waving too, and shouting. No, not shouting, Sharp realized. Screaming. "Oh, my God," he said, and he took a couple of running steps and dove into the waist-deep water and swam, sprinting. He looked up to get his bearings. He was almost there. Sharp swam up behind the redhead and pinned her arms to her sides and wrapped his arms around her and leaned back, kicking to keep himself afloat and her head out of the water. "I've got you," he said. "You're okay. Now calm down. It's okay." Sharp felt the girl relax. "Something," she said. "Bit you?" Sharp asked. "Horrible and slimy and gross." "What? Stung you?" "No, it—" She rolled over and clung to Sharp, weeping. Sharp said, "Let's get you to shore." He took one of her arms and gestured for the other girl to take the other arm. Together they side-stroked toward shore, holding the girl between them. Soon they could touch bottom. "Back in a minute," Sharp said, and he turned toward deep water and swam an easy breaststroke. When he gauged that he'd reached the spot where the girls had been, he stopped swimming and spun in a slow circle, searching the water. He didn't know what he was looking for. Then his hand touched something. He jerked upward. He looked at the water where his hand had been. There, a foot underwater, was something creamy white and roundish, about the size of a watermelon. He brought it to the surface, and as soon as the air touched it, his nostrils were assailed by a vile smell of putrefaction. It wasn't meat. It was fat, blubber, pinkish white, and shredded. He rolled it over. The skin side was blue-black and newly scarred near the middle with a circle 5 or 6 inches across of what looked like cuts. In the center of the circle was a single deep gash that went all the way through the skin and into the blubber. On one of the edges was half of another circle. "Sweet Jesus," Sharp said. Darling and Mike were on their knees in the afterhold of the privateer, sanding away the rough edges around the paint they had chipped. Darling felt the boat dip slightly as a weight came aboard. He looked up and saw Sharp standing by the open hatch. "Hey, Marcus. Sorry to interrupt. Could you look at something for me?" Sharp set a towel-wrapped bundle on a cutting table amidships. "You bet." Darling removed his mask and goggles and started up the ladder. Mike kept sanding until Darling said, "Come look, Michael boy, don't miss a chance for a breather." Darling held an end of the towel while Mike unrolled it. Flies materialized from nowhere. "Whale," Mike said. Darling nodded. "Young, too." "What tells you that?" Sharp asked. "The blubber is thin," Mike said. "Is it sperm whale?" "I warrant," Sharp said. "Turn it over." Darling used a knife blade to flip the blubber. In the direct sunlight, the circle of marks shone like a necklace. Mike and Darling looked at each other. Then Darling said softly, "Son of a bitch." Sharp said, "What is it, Whip? What did this?" "I hope it isn't what I think it is," Darling said. "What?" "Come on, need to consult a book or two." Darling led the way up the path to his house. Darling led Sharp to a small room lined with bookcases and furnished only with a huge cedar desk and 2 chairs. Sharp let his eyes scan the titles on the shelves. It seemed that every book ever written about the sea was here. Darling pulled a large cased volume from a shelf and read the title aloud. "Mysteries of the Sea." "About 10 years ago," he said as he leafed through the pages, "I was on a boat in the Sea of Cortez with some aquarium people from California, helping them to gather strange critters. We saw some Mexicans fishing with lights, jiggling for big squid, Humboldt squid, 4 or 5 feet long, 50 or 60 pounds. I'd never seen the big ones before, so I decided to get in the water with them. One of the bastards made a run at me. I swatted at him, and faster than I could believe, one of his whips shot out and grabbed my wrist. I thought 100 needles were stabbing me. I punched him in the eye, and he let me go." "Jesus," Sharp said. Darling said, "There," and pushed the book toward Sharp. Sharp stared at a 19th century woodcut of a hideous creature, a prehistoric-looking beast with a huge bulbous body that ended in a tail shaped like an arrowhead. It had 8 writhing arms, 2 whips twice the length of the body, and 2 gigantic eyes. "That," Whip said, "is the granddaddy of the critter that grabbed me. It's Architeuthis dux, the oceanic giant squid." "Well, it can't be real, can it?" "It's real, all right. Rare, but real." Darling paused. "It's out there now. It's here." Sharp looked at Darling. "Come on, Whip," he said. "You want facts? Okay." Darling pulled out another book. "The Last Dragon," he said, by Herbert Talley, Ph.D. Years before, he had turned pages down as marks, and he opened the book to the first mark. Giant squid have been written about since the 16th century, maybe earlier. He turned to another mark. "One of the buggers came up in the Indian Ocean and dragged down a schooner called the Pearl. Killed everybody. There were more than 100 witnesses." Darling slammed the book. "Damn," he said, "I can't believe I didn't figure this out sooner. There's nothing else that could have torn up gear like that. No shark that's ever swum is big enough and mean enough to break a 38-foot boat into splinters." He paused. "And nothing else is so all-out, bone-deep evil." As they headed back outside, Charlotte looked up and said, "Whip, what is this about a giant squid? What are you, some kind of psychic? It was on the radio just now. Somebody found something on a beach, and one of the scientists at the aquarium said—" "Yeah, Charlie," Darling said. "It looks like we've got ourselves a giant squid. Well, they're having a big meeting about it tomorrow night, down at the lodge hall. Fishermen, divers, sailboat types. The whole island's in an uproar." "I don't wonder." "William," Charlotte said, and she rose from the table and came over and took Darling's arm. "Promise me." "Come on, Charlie. Nobody but a horse's ass would make a run at a beast like that. Like Liam St. John, for instance?" "What do you mean?" "St. John said on the radio that he's going to catch it, to save Bermuda." "Fat, bloody chance," Darling said. "Dr. St. John's going to end up in the belly of the beast, and good riddance." What a joke, Darling thought as he left the lodge hall. They'd called it an island forum, but it had really been nothing but a charade. Everybody'd been allowed to blow off steam and offer cockamamie suggestions for dealing with a monster that few people had ever heard of and nobody had ever seen. Darling took a deep breath of night air and decided to walk home. It was only a couple of miles, and he needed the exercise after sitting for 2 hours. He figured the meeting would go on for at least another hour, with people squabbling over how to phrase the warnings that would have to be issued. It was probably too late to worry. Thanks to Liam St. John and his everlasting crusade for personal publicity, this morning's paper had carried the headline, "Monster is Giant Squid, St. John confirms." By now, that news would be burning up the wires all around the world. Some people had voiced the hope that the Newport to Bermuda race wouldn't be affected, but the part of it that benefited Bermuda already had been. Hotel reservations were down, caterers were finding themselves with no affairs to cater, taxi drivers were sitting idle. Halfway through the meeting, Ernest Chambers, the diver who had offered Darling charter work during the race layover, had jumped to his feet and announced that 2/3 of his dive trips had been canceled, and what was the government going to do about it? Darling walked along the road to Somerset and thought about what to do. As he came to a narrow part of the road, a car approached from behind. He stepped off the pavement and backed against the wall to let the car pass, but as it passed him, it slowed and stopped just ahead. A man got out of the passenger side. "Captain Darling?" he said. "Do I know you?" Darling said. My name is Dr. Herbert Talley, Captain." Talley, Darling thought. Talley? Doctor of what? Squid, Captain. You don't have to talk down to me. I know the word malacology. Sorry, of course. Talley. You wrote that book, right? The Last Dragon? Talley smiled. Yes, I did. Good book. Full of facts. Thank you. Captain, we'd like to talk to you. Who's we? Talley gestured toward the car. Mr. Osborne Manning. And when Darling said nothing, Talley said, Manning, the father of the... Oh, yeah. Sorry. He would appreciate a word with you. No harm, I guess. Go up the road 100 yards. Pull in under a sign that says Chili's. I'll meet you there. Chili's was a one-room restaurant owned by a retired shark fisherman. If pressured, Chili would serve a patron something he called fried fish, but he made his living purveying cheap booze. Darling walked into Chili's. An enormous man, black as a Haitian and broad as a linebacker, slid off a bar stool and ambled over to Darling. Whip, he said. Chili. They with you? Chili tipped his head toward the corner. They are? Good enough. When they were seated, Darling looked at Osborne Manning, who appeared to be in his early 50s. He was impeccably tended, but it was Manning's eyes that Darling couldn't stop looking at. They looked like two black tunnels, as if the eyes themselves had disappeared. Darling thought, maybe that's what grief does to a man. Manning noticed Darling staring at him and said, Thank you for coming. There was an awkward silence then, as if Talley and Manning didn't know how to begin. What the hell, Darling thought, no harm in being polite. He said to Manning, sorry about your youngsters. Yes, was all that Manning said. I can't imagine what... No, you can't, Captain. You can't imagine. Not till it happens to you. He squeezed his hands together and shook his head. You want to know what the feeling is like? I feel like I'm dead. Tally said, Captain Darling, we liked what you said at the meeting. You were there? Why? In the back of the room, we wanted to see how people are reacting to all of this. Well, that's easy, Darling said. They're scared to death. But you're not scared? I mean, it's like anything else big and awful in nature. You leave it alone, it'll leave you alone. He thought of Manning's children and added, generally, as a rule. That doctor back there, St. John, he's a fool. Well, that's one way to put it. But there is something I disagree with you on. What's happening here is not an accident. Well, what is it then? I have a theory, Tally said. Up to the middle of the last century, nobody quite believed in the existence of Architeuthis or of any giant squid. The few sightings were dismissed as the rantings of sailors gone mad. And all of a sudden, in the 1870s, there was a rash of sightings. I read about them, Darling said. Then it all stopped again until the early 1900s when, for no reason, there were more sightings and strandings. I wondered if there was a pattern, so I collected reports of every sighting and every stranding, and I fed them into a computer with all the data on major weather events, current shifts, and so forth, and I told the computer to find some rhyme or reason to it. The computer's answer was that the pattern of sightings and strandings coincided with cyclical fluctuations in branches of the Labrador Current. For most of the cycle, Architeuthis is never seen, alive or dead. How long are these cycles, Darling asked. 30 years. And the last one began in... He knew the answer before the words were out of his mouth. 1960, ran through 62. I see. Yes, Tally said, you do see. It's here. Because it's time. Darling said, now, this is all very interesting, but it doesn't say a lick about why the beast is suddenly eating people. But it does, Tally said. Architeuthis feeds by accident. His normal diet is sharks, rays, big fish, but he'll eat anything. Let's say that cyclical currents are bringing him up from the level where he usually stays. And let's say he's finding that his usual food sources are gone. From what I hear, Bermuda's almost fished out. Doc, Darling said, there's one thing you haven't talked about. Nature's #1 rule. Balance. When there get to be too many sea lions, up jump the white sharks to keep them down. Tally said, there's only one animal that preys on Architeuthis, and that is the sperm whale. Man has been killing off the sperm whales. They could already be practically extinct. More questions crowded into Darling's mind. Suddenly, he realized that he was taking the bait. It's late, he said, and I get up early. Captain Darling, Manning said, this creature, this beast, it killed my children. Mr. Manning, Darling said, this beast is just an animal. I believe that it knows a form of rage. It knows vengeance. Well, so do I. You can't take revenge on an animal. Yes, I can. I will kill this beast. No, you won't, Tally said. Captain, we can. It can be caught. If you say so, Doctor, but leave me out of it. Manning said, how much do you charge for a day's charter? $1,000, he said. I'll give you $5,000 a day plus expenses. Darling shrugged. Look, Mr. Manning, you've got all that money. You can hire yourself some big-time experts. Bring in a ship. Don't think I didn't try. Here's the way it is. I could have chartered a boat, but your pig-headed government has so many rules and regulations, so many permits and licenses, that it would have taken months to set it up. So I have to use locals, and that means using you. You're the best. As I see it, we've only got one problem, you and I, and that's money. Tell me your price. Okay, Darling said. You've laid down your cards. Here are mine. I've got $250,000 wrapped up in my boat, and no question I could use your money. But the only other asset I've got is wrapped up in these clothes, and if I lose that asset, my personal worth is zero." He stood up. "So, thanks, but no thanks." He nodded at Tally and walked out. When Darling had gone, Manning signaled to Shilly for the check. Tally and Manning did not speak again until they were in the parking lot, and then Manning said, "How much do we know about Darling?" "Just reputation. He's the best around." No, about him. Personally." "Nothing." "Well, nose around. See what you can learn. Old truism, Tally. Knowledge is power. Another truism. Every man has his price. All we have to do is find Darling's, and then he's ours." Charlotte was waiting in the kitchen when Darling arrived home. When he'd finished telling her about the evening, she kissed him and said, "I'm proud of you." $5,000 a day. Darling shook his head. "Yes, but then—" Darling put an arm around her. "You could have thrown me a hell of a funeral." Charlotte looked at him and said, "Just remember your promise, William. Don't get involved with people who have nothing to lose." Mike was waiting on the dive step. "You done?" he asked as he took Darling's tank and weight belt and hauled them up onto the deck. Darling nodded and pulled himself up onto the dive step. "What are we doing out here, Michael?" he said when finally he could speak. "We should be sitting in a condo in Vero Beach drinking pink ladies and watching the sunset, instead of casting ourselves into the sea and damn near drowning, all for a measly $5 bill to replace government buoys." "It pays the fuel." Barely," Darling said. "Only thanks to you." Mike had determined that with some minor fiddling with the engine, he could make it run fine on a mixture of diesel oil and kerosene. Because they were running on cheaper fuel, they might actually clear $250 on the day. There was no other work, at least not work Darling would do. The aquarium retainer was gone, and the race layover had passed without a single dive charter for anybody. It had been nearly 2 weeks since anybody had seen a sign of the squid, and still not a single diver had gone into the water. Sometimes he had regretted turning down Tally, especially days like today, when his mouth ached from biting on the regulator mouthpiece, all for a couple of $100 that he'd have to split with Mike. But as the saying went, Tally and Manning were folks to feed with a long spoon. Besides, he wasn't totally out of hope. A restaurant down in town needed its dock repaired. He heard that the telephone company might be wanting a cable laid. That was all he wanted. Work. He didn't know how Charlotte was keeping food on the table and the lights turned on and the insurance paid up, but she was, somehow. After lunch, they cruised southwest along the outer edge of the reefs, meandering toward home. "Look there," Mike said, pointing down from the flying bridge. 2 snappers were floating belly up. A moment later they saw 2 more, then a porgy and an angelfish. "The hell's going on?" Darling said. They heard a noise then, in the distance, a deep, resonant ka-whump, and they felt a thud through the steel at their feet. A half a mile ahead and to the right they could see a boat, and in front of the boat a torrent of spray. Mike picked up the binoculars. It's the aquarium's boat," he said. "Christ almighty," Darling said. "Liam's gone and got himself a permit to bomb the beast." "That was close," Dr. Tally said, and restrained himself from using the other words he wanted to say, words like fool and idiot. "Not really, Doctor," said St. John. "I've made a study of explosives. We were quite safe." Tally swallowed his bile and tried to think of how to escape from this diminutive bully. He should never have accepted St. John's invitation to come along. St. John had welcomed him aboard and then proceeded to lecture Tally about the subject that Tally had made his life's work, a lecture laced with pseudo-facts gleaned, Tally imagined, from comic books, horror movies, and supermarket tabloids. When Tally had contradicted one of St. John's putative facts, St. John's response had been a curt, "Ridiculous," and he had changed the subject. St. John had stayed away from Tally for most of the voyage, had instructed Tally to stay aft, where it's safe, while he lectured his crew about giant squid and underwater explosives. By now, all Tally wanted to do was to get off this boat before St. John pulled some boner that blew them all to bits. "Set!" called a voice from the bow. St. John said to the helmsman, "How far are we from the charge?" "Oh, about 100 yards. Get closer. But get closer, damn it!" Yes, sir." Then St. John shouted, "Fire!" And the crewman turned the switch on the firing box. There was a sound of rumbling and a sensation as if a giant hand had grabbed the boat and was trying to lift it into the sky. Finally, the boat fell back. St. John came aft and leaned over the side. "Deeper," he said. The helmsman stepped out of the cabin and said, "Doctor, Ned says we sprung a leak. Why did you get us so close?" "What?" You told me. "The safety of this vessel is your responsibility. If you thought it was dangerous to get so close, you had an obligation to refuse. Idiot!" "How serious is the leak?" "Well, maybe we should start home just in case." "Nonsense! Fix it with epoxy," St. John said, and he disappeared inside the cabin. Tally thought, "Great, now we're going to sink." As he turned back, he saw a boat in the near distance. St. John came out of the cabin sweating. There's a boat over there," Tally said. "Perhaps we should—" "I see it." St. John banged on the cabin bulkhead. "Hey!" The helmsman stuck his head out the door. Yes, sir?" "You see that boat over there? Call them on the radio and tell them to follow us in." "Tell them, Doctor?" "Yes, tell them." "Yes, sir." "You recognize them?" Yes, sir, the privateer. It's Whip Darling." "Oh." "Forget it." "Sir?" "Forget it. Don't call him. Just get us home." "Look how she's riding," Mike said. "Low," Darling said. "She's holed herself." You want to follow him in?" "If they want help, they can call us," Darling said. "I'd like that, but I don't think Liam would." "Hey!" Mike was pointing at something shiny floating between two swells. "Be damned," Darling said as they neared the floating thing. "More of that spawn. We should take some back for that Dr. Tally to have a look at." "You want me to dip it up?" "Well, why not?" Mike leaned overboard and scooped with the net. As he touched the jelly, it fragmented. "Damn," he said. "Should come apart. Let me try again." As the net touched the water, something grabbed it and pulled. "Hey!" he yelled, flailing. "Let it go!" shouted Darling, but Mike didn't. His body turned half a somersault and he landed in the water on his back. Darling ran to the back of the flying bridge and half jumped, half slid down the ladder and hurried aft. Darling was worried he might panic, and panicked Mike was. He forgot how to swim. He screamed incoherently and windmilled with his arms. Darling grabbed a rope and coiled it and aimed it at Mike's head and threw it. Mike's hand found it and fastened on. Then Darling pulled him to the dive step, bent down and hauled him up onto the step. Mike lay there. "Fuck this." "Why, Michael," Darling said, smiling. "He was just a big old turtle, that's all. I saw him. Must have decided to fight you for the spawn." Captain Wallingford was hunched over his desk, signing requisition forms, when Marcus Sharp arrived, rapped twice on the door jamb, and said, "Captain?" "Sharp, what is it?" Wallingford spoke without looking up. "No, wait, don't tell me. You've heard the scuttlebutt that there's a research vessel, the Ellis Explorer here, loaded with space-age search gear, including a state-of-the-art $2 million submersible, and they've come to look for the giant squid. You've heard that we're going to put a Navy man on that ship and in the submersible when they go down, and you've come to volunteer. You think you're the best man for the job." Wallingford looked up and smiled. "Well?" Yes, sir." "Okay, you've got it. Be at dockyard at 1600. They're going to go out and anchor tonight and put the sub down first thing tomorrow." Back in his quarters, Sharp packed an overnight bag and threw in a Walkman, a few tapes, and a book. He picked up his bag and started out. At the door, he remembered that he had been scheduled to go diving the next day with Darling, and so he went back inside and picked up the phone. "Glad you called, Marcus," Darling said when he picked up the phone. "I was going to call you. How about a rain check for tomorrow? There's a bunch of people here from some magazine who want to put a submarine down to take pictures of the squid, and they've hired me as an escort." "You're going?" They don't know where to look for the thing. They don't know where the drop-off is or where the bottom shelves off. If they took the time, they could find out for themselves. But that boat must cost $10,000 a day to run, so they see using me as a shortcut. And you agreed to go? I thought, Marcus, it's $1,000 a day. But all I'll do is show 'em where to go and float around over their submarine in case it has to surface away from the ship. Darling laughed. You could be damn sure I'm not going down in that sub. Whip, Sharp said, and he paused, feeling his enthusiasm begin to ebb. I'm supposed to go with them. The Navy's worried that they'll snoop around our sonar gear. Well, what makes Wallingford so sure they won't find the squid? And the Navy thinks it's gone away. Well, I don't. Neither does Tally, or he would have gone back to Canada. For a moment there was silence. Then Darling said, You don't mean you're going down in that submarine? Sure, Sharp said. That's the whole point. Don't. I have to, Whip. No, you don't, Marcus. There's one thing we both have to remember. There's a big difference between being brave and being foolish. A woman stood on the bow tossing pieces of bread to schools of little fish. Hello, Sharp said. She turned to him and said, Hi. She was in her late 20s, tall and lithe and deeply tanned. I'm Marcus Sharp, Lieutenant Sharp. Oh, she said, right, come on aboard. I'm Stephanie Carr, the woman said. I take pictures. She led him aft into the cabin. A short, wiry man with a crew cut, who might have been anywhere between 30 and 45, sat on the deck and watched a tape of a James Bond movie. That's Eddie, Stephanie said. He drives the sub. Eddie? This is Marcus. Eddie gestured distractedly and said, Hey, Navy man, a voice called down from the bridge. Come and meet Hector, Stephanie said, and she led the way up onto the bridge. Hector appeared to be in his mid-40s. He was dark-skinned and beefy and wore a starched white shirt with captain's shoulder boards. He was working with a pencil and a ruler on a chart of the waters around Bermuda. This Darling, he said. He tells me to go anchor out here. He tapped a spot on the chart. But out here, there's no bottom. Captain, Sharp said, in Bermuda, if I had to choose between some map maker from Coast and Geodetic Survey and Whip Darling, I'd go with Whip Darling every time. It was after 5 when they left the point at dockyard behind and headed north toward the channel markers. Sharp and Stephanie stood on the observation deck atop the cabin. Where do you live? Sharp asked. San Francisco, sort of, but nowhere really. I keep a tiny apartment there just to have a place to come back to, but I'm away 10 or 11 months a year. So you're not married? No, hardly, she said, smiling. Who'd have me? He'd never see me. As Sharp looked at her, he suddenly felt a stab of pain that he hadn't felt in many months, the pain of recollection of Karen. They had dinner in the cabin, and when they had washed the dishes, Eddie and the 2 crewmen gathered around the TV. Stephanie poured coffee for herself and Sharp, took a cigarette from one of her camera bags, and led him outside onto the open stern. What about you? She asked. Are you married? No, Sharp said, and then he told her about Karen. That's rough, she said when he'd finished. I don't think I could deal with that kind of pain. Before Sharp could say anything else, they heard Hector shout, Hey, Navy man, come here! They walked forward along a passageway and up the 4 steps to the outside door of the bridge. Sharp stepped inside the bridge. What do you make of that? Hector said, and he gestured at the side-scan sonar. Of what? We've been swinging at anchor. I think maybe we swung ourselves right over atop a shipwreck. As he bent to the machine, Sharp saw a shapeless smear. He looked at the calibration numbers on the side of the screen. The smear seemed to be 20 or 30 meters long, possibly the right size for a shipwreck. Could be, he said. Well, have a look at it from the sub tomorrow, said Hector. Give me the Loran numbers, will you? Sharp crossed the bridge to the Loran. None of them looked at the sonar screen again. If they had, they would have seen a change in the shapeless smear. They would have seen some lines fade, others appear, as the thing 3,000 feet beneath them began to move. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when Sharp arrived in the cabin and poured himself a cup of coffee. Through the window he saw that the privateer was tied to the port side of the ship. He started out of the cabin, but stopped when he heard Darling's voice behind him up on the bridge talking to Hector. "Morning, Marcus," Darling said when Sharp appeared. "Are you sure you still want to go down there and freeze your buns off?" "Yes," said Sharp, "I'm sure." Darling turned to Hector and said, "I'll have my mate hang off a ways till you launch, and then he'll track the sub on my gear." Sharp said, "What are you going to do, Whip?" "Keep an eye on you, Marcus," Darling said, and he smiled. "You're too valuable to lose." At close range, the submersible looked to Sharp like a giant antihistamine capsule, a Dristan with arms. Each arm had steel pincers on the end, and mounted between them was a video camera in a globular housing. Perspiration poured from Sharp as he lowered himself through the round hatch. Stephanie was already inside, as was Eddie, wearing a down vest and crouching forward to check his switches and gauges. The interior of the capsule was a tube 12 feet long, 6 feet wide, and 5 feet high. There were 3 small portholes, one in the bow for Eddie, one on either side for Stephanie and Sharp. Sharp dropped to his knees and crawled to the cushion. He found that he could sit or kneel or lie with his feet raised, but there was no way he could straighten out. "How long does it take to get to the bottom?" he asked. "Half an hour," said Stephanie. "We drop at 100 feet a minute." "How long do we spend down there?" Up to 4 hours." 4 hours? Never, Sharp thought. Not a chance. He heard the hatch slam above him. "You look like death," Stephanie said. "No kidding. Can I give you a camera? We'll be at different portholes. We may see different things." "Sure." Sharp wiped his hands on his trousers and took the camera from her. The capsule began to sink. Water now covered the portholes. Sharp looked through the porthole and saw that the blue outside was fast deepening to violet. Below, blue yielded to black, and all was night. They fell slowly, seeing nothing, hearing nothing, feeling nothing, and Sharp shivered. They were at 2,000 feet and falling. Into his microphone, Eddie said, "Activating illumination," and he flicked a switch. 2 1,000-watt lamps on top of the submersible flashed on, casting a flood of yellow light that penetrated 15 or 20 feet. And then a universe of life exploded before Sharp's eyes. Tiny planktonic animals swirled in and out of the light. Something resembling a gray and red ribbon with yellow eyes and a pompadour of tiny spikes wriggled up to the porthole. An anglerfish appeared, round, bulbous and brownish-yellow, trailing short mucus fins. Its eyes protruded like blue-green sores. It had fangs like needles of diamond. Soon other animals swarmed around the capsule, drawn by the light. There were snake-like creatures that seemed to trail hairs along their backs, large-eyed eels with lumps on their heads that looked like tumors, translucent globes that seemed to be all mouth. Sharp started as Darling's voice suddenly boomed over the speaker inside the capsule. "You've got yourself a bloody zoo down there, Marcus." Forgetting his fear, ignoring the cold, Sharp picked up the camera Stephanie had given him and adjusted its focus. Hovering now at the confluence of 2 currents that swept around the volcano, the creature grew agitated. Something was intruding, disturbing the normal rhythms of the sea. Somewhere in the distance below there was a great light, moving, emitting the pulsing sound, galvanizing other animals. The creature had not eaten in days. It drew water in through its body cavity and expelled it through its funnel, aiming for the source of light. It began to hunt. Sharp looked at his watch. They'd been down for nearly 3 hours, drifting about 500 feet over the bottom. "What say I put her down on the bottom?" Eddie said into his microphone. Darling's voice came over the speaker. "Well, you might as well," he said. "Maybe you'll see a shark." Eddie pushed the control stick forward and the capsule began to drop. The bottom was like pictures Sharp had seen of the surface of the moon. Suddenly, Eddie straightened up and said, "Christ!" "What?" Sharp said. Eddie pointed at Sharp's porthole. "Snakes! Sharp thought at first. 1,000,000 snakes, all swarming on a dead body. And then he thought, no, they can't be snakes. They're eels. But no, they had fins. A hagfish, Sharp realized, one of the nightmare demons that bored holes in larger animals and gnawed the life out of them. Eddie swung the submersible over the gnarled ball of hagfish. "A sperm whale," he said. "It's the lower jaw of a sperm whale. Do you see that, Whip?" "Yes," Darling's voice said, sounding flat and distant. "Well, what the hell kills a sperm whale?" Darling didn't answer, but in the silence, Sharp thought, "I know," and he began to sweat. The creature's eyes gathered more and more light. Its other senses recorded the increased vibrations in the water. Something was there, not far away, and it was moving. Soon it saw the lights, little pinpoints of brightness piercing the black, and throughout its body it felt the thrumming vibrations emanating from the thing. Motion meant life. Vibrations meant life. And so, although it had yet to perceive the scent of life, it determined that the thing was alive. It attacked. "Now, the thing's not down here," Eddie said. "We're going up." He pulled back on the control stick. Sharp looked at the digital depth readout on the control in front of Eddie. As Sharp watched, the numbers changed, ever so slowly. Suddenly, the capsule jolted and yawed to one side. Sharp was knocked off his knees, and he grabbed for a handhold. "What the hell was that?" Sharp said. I didn't see," Eddie said. "Felt like we hit an air pocket or like a ship passed overhead." "You mean a current?" Over the speaker, Darling's voice said, "Not a chance. There are no currents down there." He paused. "Something's out there." "Oh, God," Sharp thought. "Here we go." He looked over at Stephanie. She had her back to him, and her camera lens was against the porthole. "Take some pictures, Marcus," she said over her shoulder. Before Sharp could reply, the capsule was jolted again, hard, and it careened to the left. A shadow passed before the lights, dimming them, then disappeared. "God damn it!" Eddie shouted, and he fought the stick righting the capsule. The capsule was rising again. Sharp looked at the readout. 960 meters, 959, 958. The giant squid rushed through the darkness, seized by paroxysms of frustrated rage. It had passed once over the lighted thing, appraising it. Then it had tried to kill it, although the signs of life the thing emitted were vague and uncertain. Because its attack had created no encouraging spore of blood or torn flesh, the squid had not pressed the attack. It had moved on in search of other nourishment. Seeking food, any food, it rushed through the water, moving slowly upward, far behind the retreating lighted thing, not pursuing it, but following it nevertheless. "That was something," Stephanie said as she pulled herself up through the open hatch and sat on its rim. She grinned down at Darling and Hector, who stood below on the ship's deck. Sharp squeezed through the hatch and sat beside her. "Did you see it?" Hector asked. "No," Sharp said, looking at Darling. "Did you get anything on video, Whip?" "Just a shadow," Darling said, and he began to walk around the submersible, examining it, touching the paint here and there. Sharp leaned over the side and looked where Whip's fingers were rubbing the paint. He saw 5 ragged scratch marks, 2 or 3 feet long. "It's the squid, isn't it?" he said. Darling nodded. "Looks like it to me." "Well, we'll be ready for him next time," said Stephanie. "I'm going to readjust the video cameras. Eddie, what's your turnaround time?" 4 hours, Eddie replied, looking at his watch. Not me, Sharp thought. I'll stay topside, he said. "You couldn't go even if you wanted to, Navy man," said Hector. "You've been bumped." "By whom?" When Hector didn't answer, Sharp looked at Darling and saw a look of disgust on his face. Then Darling turned away and spit over the side of the ship. Tally stood on the terrace and gazed across Castle Harbor. Manning came out of the kitchen carrying his coffee and wearing a bathrobe. "What's up?" he said. "There was a ship docked here yesterday called the Ellis Explorer. It's got a submersible on board. It's here looking for Architeuthis. I think they found it, even though they don't know for sure. Ellis, Manning said. Barnaby Ellis? I don't know, I guess so. But the point is, Osborne, I think the squid is still here and still hungry. And there's a ship out there with equipment and capability to take people down to it. On that sub, we could see it and study it and film it and learn about it. And you could kill it if... Tally paused. If what? Manning said. If we can get on board. You have power, Osborne. Now's the time to use it. Manning hesitated, thought for a moment, and then got up and went indoors. Tally heard him punching numbers into a telephone. He heard Manning talking into the phone. When Manning came back, he said, It's all set. I talked to Barnaby himself. The ship is here for one of his magazines, and he agreed to bump his people and give us a crack at it tomorrow. Tomorrow? Said Tally. Well, why not today? The sub is filled. The Bermuda government's got someone on it this afternoon. Seems they've got a plan to kill the squid. How? Tally suddenly felt sick. I have no idea, Manning said, but I wouldn't worry about it. How can you be so nonchalant? I'd say their chances are about 1 in a million. Why? Because the chief squid hunter they're sending is your friend Liam St. John. Sharp and Darling stood on the observation deck. Stephanie climbed the ladder to join them. This should be interesting, she said. Darling looked at Stephanie, and after a moment he said, You think St. John's got a chance? A chance, yes. And he sure got enough bait. 100 pounds of fresh tuna should attract anything that lives down there and keep it busy long enough for us to do what we have to do. How does he think he's going to kill it? Darling asked. With 2 weapons, Stephanie said, gesturing at the mechanical arms of the submersible. Both are attached to the sub's arms, and he can work them from inside the capsule. One is a spear gun loaded with a syringe of strychnine. The other's like a diver's bang stick. It fires a 12-gauge shotgun shell loaded with globs of mercury. I can see how you think it all makes sense, Darling said, but what you haven't calculated is that this beast doesn't know sense. It doesn't play by our rules. It makes the rules. Oh, he's taken that into account. How? If the weapons don't kill it, he thinks that the squid might wrap itself around the capsule, and then it can be brought up to the surface on the cables and killed up here. My God, girl, Darling said, that's like trying to catch a tiger by sticking your arm in his mouth and shouting, I've got him. He can't crush the submersible, Stephanie said. I think it sounds like a pretty good idea. Well, I think it sounds like damn foolishness, said Darling, and he left the deck. Don't go down, Sharp said to Stephanie when Darling had gone. You're nice to care, Marcus, she said, and she touched his cheek. But I want to go. Darling used the radio and called to the privateer, which by now had drifted a mile to the north. Just checking, Michael, he said. You staying awake? Barely. Okay with you if I put a line down and try to catch me some snappers? Sure, but drive the boat over here first. That way you'll be in position to track the sub. Roger that, Whip, Mike said. Privateer standing by. Mike took the boat out of gear and let it settle. He looked across the still water and tried to gauge his distance from the ship. 150 yards, he guessed, maybe 200. Just about right. He went aft and rigged 2 hooks on a line, put mackerel on each, and tossed the rig overboard. He saw at his feet the bucket that the mackerel had been in. It was half full of bloody water and scales and bits of flesh. He picked up the bucket, tossed its contents overboard, and watched a little slick of blood and oil begin to spread behind the boat. The creature blew a volume of water from its funnel and propelled itself through the blue water, searching for the faint trail of food scent that it had found, then lost, then found, then lost again. The higher it went, however, the closer to the surface it rose, the more promising the water seemed. There was no substance, but there were hints that tantalized the squid, as if the water near the surface contained the residue of food. It rose still higher, close to something dark above, and soared directly beneath it, pushing a vast mass of water before and above itself. Goddamn puppy sharks, Mike thought as he examined the end of the line. Leave a line cleated for 1 minute, and they sneak up on you and bit it the hell off. The boat rose beneath him as if lifted by a sudden sea, and he raised his eyes from the line and looked at the flat water. It was weird how ground swells could appear like that. In the distance, he saw the crane on the Ellis Explorer pick the submersible up from its cradle and swing it out over the side of the ship. How long did they say it took that submersible to get to the bottom? What, half an hour? Well, they still had time to put down another line. There was a vague noise behind him, a squishing kind of noise. Part of his mind registered the noise, but he was concentrating on threading the monofilament through the eye of the swivel. The line slid through the hole. "Gotcha," Mike said. He heard the squishing noise again, closer this time, and there was a sound of scratching. He started to turn toward it. There was a smell to it, too, a familiar smell, but he couldn't quite place it. And then suddenly Mike's world went dark. Something had him around the chest and head, something tight and wet. Mike's hands grabbed at it, and then slipped off as the thing that had him began to squeeze. He felt a pain as if 1,000 ice picks were piercing his flesh. As his feet lifted off the deck and he felt himself dragged through the air, he realized what had happened. Hector sat at the console in the control room. Darling stood behind him wearing a headset, and Sharp stood beside Darling. Soon they saw the bottom rise up. The turbulence of the submersible's propeller stirred the mud and caused a cloud that dimmed the video camera's lens. The capsule settled and the cloud cleared. Suddenly, a shadow passed over the bottom. "Shark," said Darling. "Liam didn't figure on sharks. It'll probably go for his bait." The monitor of the exterior camera focused on the wire cage. The shark bit down on the corner of the cage. On the other monitor, they saw St. John take the handles that operated one of the mechanical arms. "Uh-oh," Darling said. He pressed the talk button and spoke into his microphone. "Don't do it, Liam. Leave the bloody shark alone. He can't take your cage." "So you say." Darling sighed, and then he said, "Look, Liam, you want to kill yourself, that's your business, but you got 2 other people down there with you, maybe not so eager to play harps." They heard Stephanie say, "Doctor, if we waste one of your weapons on a shark, we're cutting our odds in half." "Don't worry, Miss Carr," St. John said. On one monitor they saw St. John push a button. On the other they saw a burst of bubbles as the dart fired from the spear gun and struck the shark. The squid had fed, but after so long a deprivation, the protein it had consumed had not satisfied its hunger, but rather had tantalized it, spurring a craving for more. It drifted downward. More light flooded in, and more. Agitated, it drew water into its body and expelled it, propelling itself across the bottom. Hunger drove it onward. St. John looked up at the video camera in the submersible and said, "What's the time?" 90 minutes gone," Hector said into his microphone. The door to the control room opened, and Darling entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I couldn't find any proper cream, so—" "Holy shit." "What?" Sharp said. "The fish. They're gone." Sharp realized what he meant. No abysmal creatures were patrolling the edge of darkness. No small fish hovered over the dead shark. No tiny scavengers gulped the bits of tuna that floated down from the wire cage. "Liam!" Darling shouted into the microphone. "Look out!" There was a hollow sound then, a scraping, a crunch. Then the capsule was jerked up and tilted forward. The interior camera showed all of them tumbling over the control panel. The exterior camera showed nothing but mud. St. John grabbed the handles for the mechanical arm. The arm's just it's stuck in the mud," he yelled. "Put power to her," Darling said to Eddie. "That beast won't like the propeller." They heard the submersible's motor whine, then shriek as it raced. The camera," St. John said. Eddie reached for the controls for the outside camera as St. John flexed and raised the mechanical arm, his finger poised over the firing button. The camera showed a field of circles, pinkish-gray, each quivering, apparently rimmed with teeth, and each containing an amber-colored claw. Darling shouted, "Fire it, Liam!" Then, as the camera was ripped from its mounts, the screen went blank. "I can't see!" St. John shouted. "Where did it go?" "Fire, Liam, fire the dart!" They saw St. John push the button to fire the dart. "It didn't fire!" Stephanie yelled. "Look, in the mud, the spear gun, the thing tore it off!" The capsule shuddered then and rolled from side to side. "What's that noise?" St. John hissed. It sounded as if a coarse file were scraping at the hull. The capsule was upside down now, and the three of them knelt on the overhead and braced themselves with their hands. "It's playing with you," Darling said over the mic, "like a cat with a toy. With any luck, it'll get bored and leave you be." "Our motor's quit," St. John said. "As soon as the critter lets you go, we'll winch you up. It won't be long now." Sharp waited until Darling had released the talk button and then said, "Do you believe that?" Darling paused before he said, "No. That son of a bitch is going to find a way in." They saw Stephanie turn and look at her porthole and scream. St. John looked and gasped. "What?" Darling said. "I think," St. John said, "a tongue." Hector changed the angle of the camera in the submersible and focused on the porthole. Then they could see it too. A tongue. It licked in circles, covering the glass with pink flesh. Then the tongue receded. St. John grabbed a flashlight from the clip on the bulkhead and shined it on the porthole. They could see only part of it, for it was bigger than the porthole, much bigger. A curved, scythe-like beak, its sharply pointed end pressing on the glass. There was a cracking noise then, and in a fraction of a second, an explosion of water, a booming sound and screams, and then silence as the monitor went dead. They all continued mutely to stare at the blank screen. As soon as Darling got into the taxi, he took off his tie and stuffed it into his jacket pocket. He hated funerals. He believed that funerals didn't do a damn thing for the dead, they were for the living. Mike had agreed with him. They'd made a pact long ago that if one of them had died, the other would bury him at sea with no ceremony whatsoever. Well, Mike had been buried at sea, but not the way they'd planned. It had been a small funeral, just family and Darling. He hadn't told them the truth about how Mike had died. Darling had said that Mike had fallen overboard and drowned. He saw no point in painting pictures for the family that would haunt their dreams for the rest of their lives. The chain was across the dirt road to Darling's house, and he paid the driver, got out of the taxi, unhooked the chain, and let it fall. Then he heard a voice. "Captain Darling?" He turned and saw Tally and Manning walking down the road toward him. "What do you want?" Darling said. "We want to talk to you," Manning said. "I've got nothing to say." Darling turned back toward the house. "Talk to us now, Captain," Manning said, "or you'll talk to the law later." Darling stopped. "The law? You got nothing better to do than threaten people?" "I didn't threaten anybody, Captain. I stated a fact." "Well, say your piece and get along." "A final offer, Captain. If you will take us out to hunt for the giant squid, I will pay you $200,000. If we don't find it, if it's gone away, if we fail to kill it, the money is yours to keep. Your only obligation is to make a good faith effort." "You still think money can do it," said Darling. "Well, it can't. Say some prayers for your children. Give your money to a good cause in their name. At least that's worth something." "That's your last word?" Manning said. "First, last, call it what you want." "I'm sorry, Captain, you leave me no choice. We need you. So—" Manning hesitated and then continued. "Here it is. I must tell you that within 10 days of close of business today, you are to deliver me a certified check for $12,000. If you fail to make the deadline, you will then have 30 days to move yourself and your belongings out of your house." Darling laughed. "All right. Next you'll tell me you're my great-great-grandfather and you built it for me back in 1770. Captain." Manning held out a piece of paper. "Read this." The paper was legalese, and the only elements Darling could parse were the name of the house, its location, an assignment of something or other to Osborne Manning, and some numbers. Maybe Charlotte could make sense of it. "I'll have to get my specs." "By all means. But why don't I tell you the substance?
Your wife has been borrowing money, using the house as collateral. She's nearly 3 months behind in the payments and has twice been notified that she is in danger of default. I bought the note from the lender. In 10 days, I will foreclose on the note." "Bullshit," Darling said. "Charlie wouldn't have done that." "She did it, Captain." "Bullshit," Darling said again and turned back toward the house, clutching the paper. The screen door slammed behind Darling. "You won't believe what the—" He stopped when he saw Charlotte and Dana's faces. They'd been crying. "No," he said. "No." And then, "Why?" "Because we had to live, William. We were living. We had food. We had fuel. We had food because Dana brought us food. How was I supposed to pay our electricity? How was I supposed to pay the house taxes?" Charlotte wiped her eyes and looked at him. "What the hell do you think we've been living on all these months?" "But, there were things we could sell. The coins. I sold them. And the 3 mold bottles and the Bellarmine jug and all of it. There was nothing more. I'll just go to the bank." "It wasn't the bank," Dana said. They wouldn't give you a mortgage. You had no steady income." "Well, who lent the money then?" "Aram Agajanian," said Charlotte. "Agajanian!" Darling shouted. Aram Agajanian was a recent immigrant to Bermuda who'd made a fortune producing softcore pornography. "Wonderful! Great!" Darling felt betrayed. He touched one of the walls. 220 years, he said. "It's just a house, William," Charlotte said. "We'll find somewhere else to live." Darling looked at his wife and his daughter. "It was passed on to me, and if I have one obligation in this life, it's to keep passing it on for the future. Let it go, William. We're alive. We're together. That's all that counts." "Like hell," Darling said, and he turned and left the room. "Like bloody hell." Darling returned to the end of his driveway. Tally still paced and fidgeted. Manning still stood like a Bond Street mannequin. Darling said, "When do you want to go?" "As soon as we can," Manning replied. "All we have to do is load up the gear. Now the terms. Dr. Tally is confident that he'll be able to locate and attract the squid within 72 hours, so you'll provision a boat for 3 days. Whether or not we catch the animal, on our return I'll destroy the note and pay you the balance of the $200,000. Your net, after securing your house, should be somewhere over $100,000. Agreed?" "No," Darling said. "Here are my terms. You'll burn the note now in front of me. Before we leave the dock, you'll give me $50,000 in cash, which will stay ashore here with my wife, in her name, in escrow, in the bank, in case we don't come back." Manning hesitated and then took out the note and a gold Dunhill lighter. "You're an honorable man, Captain." Charlotte lay on her side, curled like a little girl and breathing deeply. Darling bent down and kissed the back of her neck. By the time he had shaved and made coffee, the sky was lightening in the east. He stood on the lawn and looked at the sky. A ridge of high cirrus clouds was creeping northward. By noon, the chop would be gone from the shallow water, and the swell would have faded from the deep. The boat was straining against its lines, rocking gently. He was about to step aboard when suddenly he sensed that someone was there. He crossed the gangplank and stepped down onto the steel deck and said, "By the time I count 3, your ass better be up." Then he stepped over the threshold into the cabin, said, "1," and saw Marcus Sharp sit up with a start and strike his head on the upper bunk. Sharp yawned. "Woo! Morning, Whip." "Well, I'll be damned. I thought maybe you could use some help today. I'd welcome a pair of friendly hands, that's for sure, but what does Uncle Sam have to say about this?" "Well, Uncle Sam sent me, sort of. The scientists have been trying to goose the Navy into launching an expedition to hunt for the squid, but the Navy claims it doesn't have the money. I think the truth is the Navy doesn't want to run the risk of looking foolish. So when I told my commander you were going out, he thought it would look good to have the Navy go too. That is me. I hope you don't mind." "Hell no." "You've had demolition training, right?" "A year." "Good. We're gonna need it." At 6:30 they cast off and motored slowly across the bay to the town dock, where Tally and Manning waited beside a rented pickup truck piled high with cases. They unloaded 22 cases in all, and when they were aboard, Darling looked aft and said to Sharp, "Cast her off, Marcus." And when he saw that the last of the lines were aboard, he put the boat in gear and began to move slowly through the dozens of boats moored in the bay. At the mouth of the bay, Darling turned north. Sharp brought Darling some coffee and stood beside him on the flying bridge. They looked to the northwest, to the spot at the edge of the deep where the Ellis Explorer had anchored. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Darling said, "You like that girl?" "Yeah. I even thought... Well, it doesn't matter." "Sure it matters." Tally came up to the bridge. He suddenly pointed and shouted, "Look!" Half a dozen flying fish scattered away from the bow of the boat, skimming over the water for 50 yards or more before splashing down again. Tally's face lit up with wonder. They came upon a trail of sargasso weed, floating patches of yellow vegetation, unconnected and yet apparently following one another like ants toward the horizon. Does it always make a straight line?" Tally asked. "Seems to. It's a mystery, like that spawn we saw. I can't figure out what that thing is, where it comes from, or where it goes." "What thing? What does it look like?" Darling described the huge gelatinous oblongs with the holes in the center. Tally asked questions, pressing Darling for details. "It's an egg sac," he said, finally. "Nobody's ever seen one before, at least not in 100 years. Do you think you can find another one?" "You never know. I'd never seen one till the other day. Now I've seen two. We tried to collect one, but it fell apart." "It would. And once its matrix broke, its cocoon, the animals inside would die." "What kind of critters live in a sack like that?" "What do you think, Captain?" Darling paused and said, "Jesus Christ! Little baby beasts? In that jelly thing?" "Hundreds," said Tally. "Maybe thousands." "But they'll die, right?" Sharp said. "Normally, yes. Most of them." Darling said, "Well, something'll eat them." "Yes," Tally said. "That is, if there's anything left down there to do that." It took them an hour to lower the gear, what Tally referred to as Phase 1 of his operation. From 3,000 feet of half-inch rope, 6 umbrella rigs fanned out at intervals on different levels, each with 10 baits on titanium leaders. The wire was unbreakable, the hooks unbendable, and 4 inches across at the base. "How much is this beast likely to weigh?" Darling had asked. A truly big squid could weigh as much as 5 or 10 tons. 10 tons? I couldn't put 10 tons of dead meat in this boat. Nobody's asking you to. We'll winch it up, and when Osborne has killed it, I'll cut specimen samples from it." "With what, your penknife?" "I saw you have a chainsaw below. Does that work?" "You're ambitious, Doc, I'll give you that." After lunch, Tally unpacked some of his cases and set up a video monitor. Darling beckoned Sharp to follow him outside. "Get me the boat hook, Marcus." "What for?" "We're going to make ourselves a little insurance." By the time Sharp had found the boat hook on the bow and brought it aft, Darling was opening a cardboard carton. Stenciled on the side of the carton was a single word in a foreign alphabet. "What's that?" Sharp asked. "Semtex," he said. "Semtex," said Sharp. "Jesus, Whip, that's terrorist stuff." Manufactured in Czechoslovakia, it was the current explosive of choice of the world's most sophisticated terrorists, for it was extremely powerful, and best of all, stable. "Where did you get it?" "It came with a shipment of compressor parts I'd ordered from Germany. It must have just been an accident in packing. We've got enough here to blow off the end of Bermuda, but we do have one little problem." "What's that?" "No detonators." "Well, we may be able to make one," Sharp said. "What do you need?" "It doesn't look like a bomb," Sharp said when they'd finished. "Well, you think it'll work?" Darling asked. "It better, hadn't it?" Well, one consolation, Marcus. If it doesn't, there'll be nobody left around to chew you out. They used duct tape to affix the contraption to the end of the 10-foot-long boat hook. Darling lifted the boat hook and shook it to make sure the bomb was secure. What happens if he swallows it before he breaks that pill bottle you loaded with phosphorus and gunpowder, he asked. It won't go off, Sharp said. If the air doesn't get to the phosphorus, it won't ignite. If it doesn't ignite, it won't trigger the rest of the detonator. It'll be a dud. So you want me to make the thing bite it? Well, just for a second whip, and then jump, or I know. With any luck, Tally's plan will work and we won't need it. Darling climbed the flying bridge. It had taken them an hour to rig the explosive. During that time, he hadn't worried about the buoys they'd put down. They hadn't thought about them. They were gone. He heard footsteps behind him, and then Manning saying, "Have you lost them?" "No," Darling said. "I just haven't found them yet." "God damn it!" Darling held up his hand, suddenly tensing. He'd sensed something. The feeling was coming through his feet, a weird thumping sensation, almost like a distant explosion. "Son of a bitch," he said, and he went to the railing and looked down into the bottomless blue. It came into view then, the only one left intact, and it was rushing for the surface like a runaway missile. It broke water with a loud, sucking whoosh sound, trailing beneath it the bust tatters of the other two buoys. Tally and Sharp had heard the commotion and had come out of the cabin, and by the time Darling reached the deck, Sharp had snagged the rope with a grapnel and was hauling the buoy aboard. Darling unsnapped the buoy, tossed the rope aside, and then wrapped the rope around the winch and turned it on. "Is it him?" Manning said. "I can't say, Mr. Manning, but I'll tell you this much. Anything strong enough to yank the stretch out of half a mile of poly rope, plus sink 3 mooring buoys, each designed to float half a ton, sink 'em so deep that the 2 of 'em burst, that is one humongous motherfucker." The first of the umbrella rigs came up, and Sharp lifted it aboard. The baits were there, whole, untouched. A moment later the second rig came up, then the third. Nothing had eaten any of them. As the fourth umbrella rig came into view, Sharp held up a hand and Darling slowed the winch. "Lord," Sharp said, reaching for the rig. "This thing looks like it was run over by a train." The rig had been crushed, and its wires had been wrapped tight around the rope. 2 of the baits were whole, still secured to the hooks, but the other baits were gone, and nothing was left of the hooks but a couple of inches of gnarled shaft. "It's Architeuthis," Tally said. "Smell the ammonia? He left us his calling card." Tally turned to Manning and grinned. "It's him, Osborne. He's here. There's no question. We found him." "Listen, Doc," Darling said. "Either you're crazy or you've been holding out on us. You can't catch a giant squid on a hook. You can't catch him with a submarine, so how in Christ's name do you plan to catch him?" Tally said, "Living things are driven by 2 primal instincts, Captain. The first one is hunger. What's the other?" Darling looked at Sharp, who shrugged and said, "I don't know. Sex?" "Yes," Tally said, "sex. I intend to capture the giant squid with sex." Tally lifted the thing by the ring and passed it to Darling. Couldn't have weighed more than 10 pounds, and when Darling tapped it, he heard a hollow sound. "I give up," Darling said simply as he handed the thing to Sharp. It looked like a 6-foot-long bowling pin made of one of the new plastics and painted bright red. Hundreds of tiny stainless steel hooks hung from the swivels all over it, and a 3-inch stainless ring was embedded in its top. "It's genius, pure and simple," Tally said. Tally took the thing from Sharp. "The sex drive doesn't notice size. Even if our animal is, as I think it is, 4 or 5 times as big as this thing, its impulse will be to breed with this." "Why the hell would it want to do anything with a piece of plastic?" Darling asked. "That's where the genius comes in." Tally began to unscrew the steel ring. "I've spent years developing a chemical that perfectly replicates the breeding attractant of Architeuthis." "Okay," Darling said. "So he comes and screws the bejesus out of this thing, then what?" "It will press its body to it," Tally flipped a few of the little hooks and they tinkled. "Each one of these will set into its flesh. When it tries to get away, it won't be able to. That's when we bring it up, just close enough on the surface for me to take pictures of it and for Osborne to kill it." Manning acknowledged Tally with a curt nod and gestured with his rifle. "Well, one thing's for sure," Darling said. "By the time he gets up here, that's going to be one pissed-off squid." It was twilight when at last the rig was ready. The wind had died, and the sea was a meadow of steely swells. "Look, Whip," Sharp said, pointing. "Whales." "Nice," Darling said. "At least there's some left." "What are they, humpbacks?" "No, sperm whales. Humpbacks don't linger like that." Tally looked at the whales and then shouted at them, "Go away!" Darling laughed. "What do you got against whales, Doc?" "Nothing. I just don't want them to scare off Architeuthis. They eat squid, you know." They shackled the ring of the rig to the cable, and then, with Darling holding one end of a 2x4 with the lure mounted on it, and Sharp the other with a camera attached, they lowered the rig over the stern and let it go. It floated a moment, until the last of the air inside the lure was expelled, and then it slipped away in a flurry of bubbles. Darkness fell. The stars strewed silver glitter on the still ocean, and the rising moon cast a golden path from the eastern horizon to the stern of the boat. Darling walked to the cabin door and flicked a switch beside it. The halogen lamps mounted on the flying bridge flashed on, and the afterdeck was flooded with light. Through the window of the wheelhouse, Darling saw that Manning didn't budge. He sat on the midships hatch cover, his shoulders hunched, his rifle cradled in his lap. Sharp passed Darling a sandwich. He nodded toward Manning and said, "Should I take him one?" "He's not interested in food," Darling said. "That man's eating himself up inside." At 10:30, Darling said to Tally, "Suppose he doesn't come tonight?" "In the morning, then, or in the afternoon. But it will come." "We might as well get some sleep, then." "If you can." "Better had. You too." The giant squid, driven by the most basic of all impulses, rushed in one direction, then stopped, then rushed in another. The signals it was receiving were partly alien and partly familiar, but its brain registered only that they were irresistible. Suddenly it encountered a stream of signals. It was a trail, strong and true. The creature honed in on it, excluding everything else. Darling awoke, without knowing what had awoken him. He rolled off the bunk, walked to the door, and stepped outside. The boat was going in the wrong direction. "Marcus, let's go!" "Why?" Tally was still groggy. "What? Because we've hooked the son of a bitch, that's why, and he's dragging us backwards." "The lure," said Tally. "Well, where's the lure?" "He's got it," said Darling, "and he's trying to run with it." Manning was standing in the stern, soaked with spray, staring at the thrumming ropes. "Is it?" he asked. "Either it's the beast, or we've hooked the devil himself." Darling directed Sharp to the starboard winch, while he took the one on the port side, and together they began to wind in the ropes. For a minute or two they made no headway. Then the ropes suddenly eased, and the boat stopped. "The strain's gone," Sharp said. "Did it get off?" "Could be, or else he's just turning." Suddenly Sharp said, "Whip, look!" and he pointed. The ropes no longer hung vertically. "He's coming up," Darling shouted. They stared at the water off the stern, trying to follow the cable. Just then the winches jolted, and the cable that had just come aboard leapt from its coils on the deck and began to snake overboard. "He's running again!" Darling cried. "No!" Manning screamed. "Stop him!" "I can't," Darling said. "You mean you won't? You're afraid. I'll show you how." Manning dropped his rifle, reached down into the coil of cable at his feet, and grabbed a length of slack. "Don't!" Manning flung the cable at the iron post that ran down into the keel, and looped it around the post and tied it off. "There," Manning said. The cable continued to run off the stern. He turned to face the stern, but as he was turning, he slipped, and just then the creature must have accelerated, for suddenly the coils of cable jumped off the deck and flew. As Manning staggered to regain his balance, one of his feet stepped through a snarl of cable, and the cable snapped tight around his thigh, and he was lifted off the deck like a puppet. Then a great force slammed the cables taut, and Manning seemed to fly backward, pulled by his legs, his arms out as if he were doing a swan dive. Light flashed on Manning's face for an instant, and Darling saw no horror, no agony, no protest. Darling heard no splash, for all sounds were overwhelmed by the sprong of the cable setting against the iron post. Instantly, the cable rose to the horizontal, and the boat was dragged backwards. Then Darling saw the cable rise above the horizontal, and he yelled, "He's up!" They heard a splash then, and a sound like a bellows, and they smelled a stinging stench. The spray that fell on them suddenly became a rain of black ink. Darling shouted, "Duck!" "What?" said Tally. Darling dove at him and tackled him to the deck, and as they fell there was a booming sound from behind the boat, like a magnum pistol being fired in a tunnel, followed instantly by a high-pitched whistle. A length of cable screamed overhead and shattered the windows in the back of the cabin. The second length followed immediately, and they heard the crash of Tally's camera housing disintegrating against a steel bulkhead. The boat pitched and yawed for a moment, and then settled back onto the sea. Tally's face was the color of cardboard, and as he got up off the deck he trembled so badly that he could barely stand. "I never thought," he began. "Forget it," Darling said. "When we get to the shore there'll be time enough to piss and moan. We'll say nice words for Mr. Manning and do all the proper things, but right now what I want to do is get us the hell out of here. Now go inside and lie down." And then Darling turned and climbed the 2 steps up into the wheelhouse. Dawn was breaking. Darling pushed the starter button. All he heard was a click, and then nothing. He pushed it again. This time, nothing at all. He swore to himself. Sometime during the night, the generator had run out of fuel. The batteries had taken over automatically, but eventually they had run down. Well, after he calmed down, he considered which of the 2 fully charged compressor batteries would be easiest to shift over to the main engine. It was nasty work, but not the end of the world. As he crossed the wheelhouse, his eyes glanced at the fish finder screen. The image on the screen was a single solid mass, a mass of something alive. Something was rising toward the surface, and rising fast. 1,000 feet, Darling guessed. They had 5 minutes, no more, probably less. Darling crawled across the engine room and pushed the heavy 12-volt battery in front of him. The beast shot up through the sea like a torpedo. It was over 100 feet long from the clubs on its whips to the tip of its tail, and it weighed 12 tons. There had been the irresistible impulse to breed, then perplexity when it had tried to mate and been unable to, then rage as it had perceived a threat from the thing. Before the giant squid had always responded to impulses of rage with instantaneous explosive spasms of destruction which had consumed the rage. But this time the rage did not abate. And so the hunter rose, driven to cause not only destruction, but death. Then, suddenly, the prey above it erupted with noise and began to move. The beast interpreted the noise and movement as signs of flight. Quickly, it rotated the funnel in its belly, turned in its own length, and attacked. Darling heard the rumble of the big diesel. He didn't wait for the engine to warm up. He rammed the throttle forward and leaned on it. At first the boat leapt forward, and then suddenly it stopped short. The pitch of the engine had changed from a roar to a complaining whine. Then it began to sputter. It coughed twice, then died, and the boat lay dead in the water. Sweet Jesus, Darling thought, the beast has wrecked the propeller. Tally was standing behind the midships hatch. When he saw Darling, he said, "Where is he? I thought you said—" "Right underneath us," Darling said. A few feet beneath the swim step, snaking out from beneath the boat, was the tip of a tentacle. Tally said, He must have tried to grab the propeller." Well, now he's lost an arm, said Darling. Maybe that'll discourage him. It won't, Tally said. All it will do is enrage him. Darling and Sharp were gazing off the bow when suddenly from behind them came Tally's voice, screaming, "No!" They whirled around and looked at the stern, and they froze. Something was coming over the bulwark. For a moment it seemed to ooze like a giant purple slug. Then the front of it curled back like a lip, and it began to rise and fan out until it was 4 feet across and 8 feet high, and it blocked the rays of the sun. It was covered with quivering circles like hungry mouths, and in each one Darling could see a shining amber blade. "Shoot it, Marcus!" Darling shouted, but Sharp stood agape. Then Tally heard something, and he turned to his left and screamed. Amidships, slithering aboard, was the beast's other whip. The scream startled Sharp, and he spun and fired. The flesh did not react. It seemed to swallow the bullet. More and more of both whips came aboard, writhing like snakes and falling in heaps of purple flesh. Tally seemed paralyzed. "Doc!" Darling shouted. "Get the hell out of there!" Suddenly both whips expanded with muscle tension, and the stern was pressed downward. "Jesus Christ!" Darling yelled. "It's coming aboard!" They saw the tentacles first, 7 thrashing arms that grasped the stern and, like an athlete hoisting himself onto a parallel bar, pushed downward to bring the body up. Then they saw an eye, whitish yellow and impossibly huge like a moon rising beneath the sun. In its center was a globe of fathomless black. "It's gonna do it," Darling thought. "The bastard's gonna sink us, and then pick us off one by one." Tally suddenly came to. He turned and ran to the bottom of the ladder and began to climb. He was halfway to the flying bridge when the creature saw him. One of the whips sprang forward, reaching for him. Tally saw it coming, and as he tried to dodge it, his feet skidded off the ladder, and he hung by his hands from one of the rungs. The whip coiled around the ladder, tore it away from the bulkhead, and held it suspended over the flying bridge, with Tally dangling from it like a marionette. "Drop, Doc!" Darling shouted, as the other whip hissed overhead and slashed at Tally. Tally let go and fell. His feet struck the outboard lip of the flying bridge. Then, almost in slow motion, he toppled backward into the sea. The whip crushed the ladder and cast it away. Sharp fired the rifle at the beast until the clip was empty. "Go, Marcus!" Darling said. "You go! Let me go, goddammit!" Sharp looked at Darling, wanted to speak, but there was nothing to say. He dove overboard. The creature was tearing the boat to pieces. And then its rampage ceased, and as if it had suddenly remembered something, the great head turned toward Darling. Darling balanced one foot on the railing and one on the deck, and he raised the boat hook over his head like a harpoon. The boat hook was torn from his hands, and he was thrown back against the iron railing. The arms reached for him. He ducked. His feet slipped out from under him, and he fell, skidding over the edge of the flying bridge and dropping onto the sloping afterdeck. The beast appeared around the edge of the cabin then, looming above him. He turned and struggled toward the other side of the boat. An obstacle blocked him. He tried to push it out of the way, but it was too heavy. It wouldn't move. He looked at it, wondering if he could dive under it. It was the big midships hatch cover floating. Lying atop it was the chainsaw. Darling grabbed the chainsaw and pulled the starter cord. It caught on the first try. One of the writhing arms flashed before his face, and Darling swung the saw at it. The saw's teeth bit into the flesh, and Darling was bathed in a stench of ammonia. The arm severed and fell away. A sound burst from the beast, a sound of rage and pain. Another arm assailed Darling, and another, and he slashed with the saw. A shower of flesh exploded around Darling, and he was drenched with green slime and black ink. Suddenly he felt something touch one of his legs under water, and it began to circle his waist. One of the whips had him. When it had circled his waist, it began to squeeze like a python, and Darling felt a stabbing pain as the hooks in each sucker disc tore into his skin. He felt his feet leave the deck as the whip picked him up, and he knew that once he was in the air, he was as good as dead. He twisted his body so that he faced the snapping beak. "Here!" he shouted, and drove the saw deep into the yawning beak. The saw stuttered as its teeth failed to slice through the bony beak and skidded off. As Darling raised the saw again, one of the arms flashed before his face, circled his hands, and wrenched the saw from him and flung it away. Then, suddenly, the beast itself seemed to rise up, as if propelled by a force from below. There was a sound unlike anything Darling had ever heard, a rushing, roaring noise, and something huge and blue-black exploded from the sea, holding the squid in its mouth. The whip that had him contorted violently, and he felt himself flying, then falling into nothingness. "Pull," Sharp said. Tally reached into the water and groped for Darling's belt. He found it and pulled, and with Sharp hauling on his arms, they brought him aboard the overturned hatch cover. Sharp touched an artery in Darling's neck. The pulse was strong and steady. "Unless something's busted inside," he said, "he should be okay." In a dark fog, Darling heard the word "okay," and he felt himself swimming up toward light. He opened his eyes. "How do you feel, Whip?" Like a truck ran over me. A truck full of knives." The boat was gone. The animal was gone. "What was it?" Darling asked. "What did it?" "One of the sperm whales," said Sharp. "It took the whole damn squid. Bit it off just behind the head." "Oh, I don't know where we are or where we're going," said Sharp. "I can't see land. I can't see a thing." Darling wet a finger and held it up. "Home," he said. "Northwest wind. We're going home." It floated on the still water, oblivious to wind and weather. But its jelly skin was remarkably strong. They were cannibals, these creatures, and those that could turned on their brethren and ate them. But there were so many, and they dispersed so fast in the water that most survived and dove for the comfort of the cold abyss. Almost all should have been eaten before they reached the bottom, or at most one creature in 100 should have survived. But the predators were gone. And so, by the time the creatures had crossed 3,000 feet of open water, nearly 10%, perhaps 100 individual animals, perhaps 200 or 300, still lived. Their bodies would mature slowly, but the time would come when they would sense their uniqueness, their superiority, and then they would venture out. They hovered, and they waited.
This has been a Random House Audiobooks presentation.